Our book today is The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America by Greg Grandin. And this is from Chapter 1, titled All That Space. The British colonies in North America were conceived in expansion. America was an aspiration, an errand, and an obligation born out of violent Christian schism and Europe's interminable religious and imperial conflicts. Depending on the intricacies of their particular interpretations of Revelation, the Protestants who settled New England might have understood flight across the Atlantic as a way of escaping European war, or they might have seen migration as a chance to open a new front and win those wars on a new soil. Here in the 1600s, in the eschatological nebula of the New World, was the first paradoxical image of America as simultaneously pristine and despoiled, empty and at the same time filled with primitives begging for deliverance, subordinated to Catholic Spain, which had conquered its part of the Americas a century earlier and stood as the great obstacle to Reformation England's rise as a world power. All yell and cry with one voice, Libertia, Libertia, Richard Hakluyt, a clergyman and court minister, wrote in the late 1500s, hoping to convince investors and his queen to establish an American colony. As Puritan society frayed under the harsh conditions of settler life, the frontier threatened and beckoned. The dark woods were filled with witches, and they were witchy, inviting hither. The forest was the place where the community could be redeemed and given new purpose, a chance to once again start anew, or it could be a place of more sorrows, wilderness sorrows, as two early Puritan patriarchs described the hardships that awaited those who ventured into uncharted territory, where whatever solidarity existed would be smashed into atoms as settlers scattered to escape the rule of the clergy. People are ready to run wild into the woods again and to be as heathenish as ever, warned Increase Mather. Expansions could be, often in the same sermon, held up as the cause of and the solution to the difficulties of establishing Christian communities. Either way, Native Americans had to get out of the way. They could die. They waste, they molder away, they disappear, said one Puritan chronicler of indigenous people who had succumbed to European pestilence years before the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, thus clearing the earth for the establishment of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. God made way for his people by removing the heathen and planting them in the ground, said another observer. They could be murdered. The holy terror unleashed by the Puritans was, according to the historian Bernard Bailyn, driven by fears of what could happen to civilized people in an unimaginable wilderness and fears of racial conflicts in which God's children were fated to struggle with pitiless agents of Satan, pagan antichrists swarming in the world around them. Survivors could be enslaved. The first patent granted in colonial America in 1626 was to a Virginia merchant and planter, William Claiborne, for inventing a device that would not just restrain Indians, but also make them work. Claiborne was given an Indian to experiment on for the trial of his invention. Colonial records do not say what this innovation might have been, only noting that it was not successful. Or they could be pushed further and further west. The prodigious and relentless population, complained New Orleans Spanish governor in 1794, progressively drives the Indian nations before them and upon us, seeking to possess for itself this vast continent which the Indians occupy between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Appalachian Mountains. More than a century and a half later, writing in the early 1950s, the Mexican author and diplomat Octavio Paz made much the same point. America was, he writes, if anything, geography, pure space, open to human action. Since it lacked historical substance, ancient social classes, established institutions, religions, and hereditary laws, reality presented no obstacles other than natural ones. Men struggled not against history, but against nature. And wherever there was an historical obstacle, indigenous societies say, it was simply erased from history, reduced to a mere natural fact and dispensed with accordingly. Evil is outside, part of the natural world, like Indians, rivers, mountains, and other obstacles that must be domesticated or destroyed. End of quote. The American Revolution is a permanent revolution, Paz went on, a nonstop expulsion of, quote, all elements foreign to the American essence and a constant invention of itself. And anything that stands in the way of that invention, anything that is in any way irreducible or inassimilable to perpetual creation, be it Native Americans, Spanish America, or history itself, quote, is not American. Quote, in other places, the future is one of man's attributes because we are men. We have a future. In Saxon America, the process is inverted and the future determines the man. We are men because we are the future, and everything that has no future is not a man. End of quote. The United States, Paz said, offers no room for contradictions, ambiguity, or conflict. The nation flies forward swiftly as if weightless across the land. Trying to stop North Americans moving west, Stephen Austin, the founder of Texas, said over a century earlier, was like trying to stop the Mississippi with a dam of straw. The drive west waxed and waned and burst forward with great passion during key moments. The book, The Edge of the Myth, by Greg Grandin. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter,
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Happy Thursday. We've got a lot to talk about. We're going to get into Donald Trump, dumb luck or master manipulator, some weird stuff going on with the economy and Chinese trade and the Fed and all this kind of stuff. Professor Richard Wolff, in fact, is going to drop by in our second hour to discuss a lot of this stuff. We've got some science facts for you. So I want to get into a conversation about Elizabeth Warren's Medicare for All plan. But up first, Judd Legum is with us, the founder of Popular.info, former founding editor-in-chief of thinkprogress.org. Popular.info is the website, and his Twitter handle is Judd Legum, Legum. Judd, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Thanks for joining us. So, two topics that you've written about in the last this week. As you know, I subscribe to your newsletter, and anybody can. It's free. You can just go over to popular.info and subscribe to it. One is the fake news on Facebook piece that you did. I'd love you to explain, what's going on with regard to that. And then the second is you've done some follow-up reporting on this scam that the Trump campaign is running. So let's start with Facebook. An explosion of fake news on Facebook?
Yeah, this was a report. It was a pretty extensive report done by an international nonprofit, Avaz. And what they did was looked at all of 2019 so far, and then just took a look at stories that were officially deemed false by fact checkers. So a fairly conservative approach to this because there's a lot of false information that, of course, the fact checkers never get to.
Right.
And they found that there's been at least 150 million views of fake U.S. political content, fake news about U.S. politics.
That's more than there are U.S. voters.
And, yeah, so enough to reach every single voter.
Yeah.
And, they kind of break that down, and it's interesting because it is about 2/3 of that are targeting Democrats, and about 1/3 of it is targeting Republicans. There is fake news that's targeting Republicans, but the majority of it is targeting Democrats, and this is a problem that is accelerating, both within this year. There's getting more and more of it. We'll probably see more of it as the election grows closer. And it's a bigger problem now, according to this report, than it was, in the months prior to the 2016 election. So right. It's a pretty big deal.
Now, when you say targeting Democrats, you're not talking about a Democratic candidate trying to reach Democratic voters. You're talking about Republicans or conservatives who are attacking Democrats. Do I have that right?
Yeah. Like one of the big stories was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants to ban motorcycles. Right? Which is not one of her proposals.
Right. No such thing.
But that was viewed 12 million times.
Wow. And that's not necessarily an ad, right? I mean, a lot of this is not advertising; it's people sharing false memes, basically.
Yeah. This isn't a look at the advertising. There's been a whole another kind of line of controversy around that because they're allowing politicians to do false ads. These are people who are just creating these fake pieces of news and distributing them via Facebook, and it's usually like a money-making scheme, right? So if you have a fake story about how a Democratic politician wants to ban motorcycles, and you get millions of people to view it on Facebook, and then a certain percentage of those clicks your website, and then you have advertisements on those websites, you can make a good amount of money from this type of fake news. That's
amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Now to the Trump campaign. I back in 2016, I guess it was, maybe 2015, I donated $5 to Donald Trump's campaign. And in fact, I typically will donate, a small amount of money to most of the campaigns that I'm really curious about or I want to follow. I just want to get on their email list. And to this day, I'm getting typically 4 or 5 emails a week from the Trump campaign asking for money.
Yeah.
And I've noticed, I'm signed up as Fred Flintstone. I've noticed that, dear Fred, the president wants to have lunch with you. Will you join us in Chicago? Will you join us in Atlanta? Was the one I think yesterday or the day before. We'll fly you there. We'll give you a meal. You'll have a nice time with the president. Blah, 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 and you can bring your spouse. And I've been seeing these things for months, but I've never seen anyone announced as the winner of one of these. You would expect that if there were winners, that they would be, highlighting that to get more people to participate.
Yeah, this is something that's been kind of digging at me for a long time, Tom. I've noticed the same thing. I follow these emails as well. And there were so many contests. Now, that's not unusual because it's an effective way to raise money. It was really popularized by Barack Obama. He had a huge kind of series of them in 2012 that he sort of used instead of a lot of high-dollar fundraisers. But as you said, people are really eager to get the photos out, right? Because it's a photo of a politician speaking to low-dollar donors, mixing in with regular folks, basically. Sure. But I noticed the same thing you did, which was that there were no photos ever released. I started digging into this, collected all the contests. There's been 16 so far. There's actually one that's supposed to happen tomorrow in Atlanta. And couldn't find any information about them. Then about a week ago, it was a week ago Monday, so almost 2 weeks ago now, there was one in Chicago, and I contacted the Washington Post reporter who was on the road with him there, figuring, well, maybe she can find out what the name of this person is or information about it because she's right there, and they'll just tell her because she's there with them. And she did ask, and they didn't tell her. So I was like, oh, this is very strange. So I put together all of the research, all the information about the 15 contests that we don't know any information about them, and kind of just put it out there of, does anyone win these contests? I can't find any information. I don't see any photos. I don't see anything, any local news articles. I don't see any individuals who participated, talking about it online. I can't find anything. And the Trump campaign ignored me, didn't respond to me, but Vanity Fair picked it up. The Trump campaign told them, oh, there are winners of every contest, didn't provide any proof. And then yesterday in the Daily Caller, basically provided them with a couple of people they claimed were winners. One of whom had just met Trump at a rally in 2017, which was kind of not the point of my piece at all. But the other one did win a contest to have breakfast with Trump, but she told the Daily Caller that Trump did not show up to the breakfast.
Oh, geez.
He was not there. And then sometime later, she got to take a picture with him. But if you look at the advertisements and all of the marketing, in this one, there were at least 4 emails about this. There were hundreds of Facebook ads about this one particular breakfast. about how Trump really wanted to have breakfast with you. There was one, the subject line was breakfast for two. And so anyway, it basically, they've exposed themselves that at least this one contest is a fraud. And if this is the best example that they can come up with after being subject to some scrutiny on this, it doesn't really speak well to the experiences of the supposed winners of the 14 other contests.
Well, given what snowflakes these guys are,
I do think this is a potentially
big story.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah. Given what
I think it's potentially a big story. It's potentially a big fraud.
Yeah, a huge fraud. Given what huge snowflakes these guys are, though, I mean, Sarah Sanders complaining about somebody calling her out in a restaurant, and, Fox News talking about it for a whole week and all this kind of stuff. I'm surprised that they didn't at least put out the excuse that, the radical left is so hostile to people who like Donald Trump that we didn't want to post their names for fear that their neighbors would, blow up their houses or something, or whatever. I mean, they're not even trying?
They didn't really do that. There's ways of doing it. I've seen some of the campaigns that will just do, they'll do photos, and then they'll just do first names. Just if they don't want to release the full name, but they weren't doing that. So I think that might have gotten them into some trouble. But they are, attacking me and my reporting, saying it's fake news because of these two winners. But the fact is, there's no evidence that anyone has had one of these meals with Trump. And the one person who we know won one of the contests also did not have a meal with Trump.
Is there a legal attempt to hold him responsible for this fraud?
You're legally required to release the names of the winners, which they haven't done.
Right.
But I don't know if anyone has enforced it yet. Maybe the New York State Attorney General can get involved.
There you go. Judd Legum, popular.info is the website and the newsletter. Judd, thanks so much.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 16 minutes past the hour. I want to get into Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plans, too, in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Floyd in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hey, Floyd, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
I'm not in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Oh, where are you?
In Victoria, Alabama.
Oh, that's weird. Okay, well, but you are Floyd, right?
Right.
Okay, I'll fix that. What's up, Floyd?
Well, I was wanting to tell you about what happened to me this summer. I had 3 heart attacks.
Oh, my.
Had to go to the hospital, quadruple bypass, and then I had complications. And I stayed in the hospital, I think it was 13 days. It sent me to rehab, several more days. And then I had something to come up, and I had to have a gallbladder removed. Mm-hmm. And I went back to the hospital for more search. What I was getting at is I'm on Medicare with a supplement. Mm-hmm. And my bill was almost $250,000. What they billed Medicare, and Medicare with their negotiations and my supplement, I didn't have to pay one penny.
Wow. Yeah, see, that's what everybody in America should have. I mean, only you shouldn't even need the supplement. I'm sorry for interrupting you, Floyd. Go ahead.
And before I retired off my job, a couple of my friends had to have open heart surgery also, and they wound up with we were union, negotiated a contract with insurance. They had to pay roughly 20-something thousand apiece for their problems, in addition to what the insurance paid. And so I was just wanting to give you that example of what Medicare for All would do for us.
Yeah. Oh, well, I had the same or a similar experience. I had back surgery year before last, and back in the day, before I was on Medicare, in fact, I had prostate cancer treatment, prostate cancer surgery before that, and ended up paying thousands of dollars in copays because we had private insurance. When I had the back surgery with Medicare, no cost, right? Not a penny, because the Medicare covered the whole thing. It's pretty amazing. Floyd, thanks for sharing your story. I appreciate it. John in Oklahoma. Hey, John, what's up?
Tom, I've been watching like everyone else, the impeachment process, and all the witnesses who are subpoenaed but don't appear for whatever reasons. Do the investigative committees not have the authority to send out someone and do a civil warrant or a body attachment and bring the witnesses?
They do not have that authority, John, and I think they're trying to get some kind of clarification on what kind of power they have under inherent contempt. The problem is, for criminal contempt, they have to refer that to the Department of Justice to enforce the law. That's Bill Barr, and he won't do it.
You suppose.
Right. I mean, he should do it, right? I mean, if Congress refers a criminal contempt of Congress citation to the Department of Justice, it should be acted on. It should be acted on right away. And typically they have been throughout history. But Bill Barr is, William Safire correctly called him cover-up General Barr. He's a cover-up artist for Republicans. He covered up Iran-Contra for Reagan and Bush, and now he's covering up this scandal for Donald Trump. So that's what's going on. John, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. Stick around. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Welcome back. I wanted to get into a conversation with you, too, about this political calculus that is being discussed across the board. There's an interesting piece in the Axios newsletter this morning pointing out that since Elizabeth Warren came out with how she was going to pay for her Medicare for All plan, roughly 70% of all the news coverage of that proposal to pay for Medicare for All from Elizabeth Warren, roughly 70% of all the coverage has been negative. And it's been negative for fairly obvious reasons. I mean, apparently from my Twitter feed this morning, I didn't watch the Morning Joe this morning, but Carol, one of our regular tweeters, noted that basically they spent a lot of time attacking Elizabeth Warren and Medicare for All. There's three kinds of thought on this, and I'd love to hear your take on these three positions. One position is basically the Joe Biden position. Everything's good, and let's just strengthen Obamacare. And we can have a conversation about a public option, but let's just strengthen Obamacare. The second, and take it back so it covers everybody in the country. The second is more kind of Pete Buttigieg's thing, which is let's have a public option. You can have Medicare if you want it. Otherwise, you can buy health insurance from Aetna or Blue Cross Blue Shield. Up to you. And then the third thinking on this is Bernie and Elizabeth Warren's position that Medicare should cover every citizen in the United States. And if people want to buy supplemental policies that do more than Medicare does, that maybe cover things like cosmetic surgery or something like that, fine. But basically, we're going to do away with insurance for basic stuff, for the core stuff, for the doctor's visits and hospital, normal hospitalizations and all that kind of stuff, and replace it with a single-payer system. But then there's this nuance between Bernie and Elizabeth. And that is, or between Warren and Sanders, I should say, be more respectful here. And that is that Bernie, Senator Sanders is coming right out and saying, yes, everybody's taxes are going to go up slightly. But the cost that you're paying for your health insurance is going to go down. Not just the insurance itself, but also your copays are going to go to zero. Your deductibles are going to go to zero. You're going to now get your eyes and teeth fixed as part of Medicare. So those costs go to zero, which are out of pocket right now. Mental health would go to zero, all of those things. And therefore, you know, the average person, even though they're paying slightly more in taxes, will be paying slightly less overall. That's what Bernie's saying, and people are congratulating him for being basically upfront and honest about that. The bet that, and so, you know, basically Bernie is making the bet that Americans would like to have a European-style social welfare state, and they're willing to pay European-style taxes for it. Elizabeth Warren is making the bet that if you say, yes, I'm going to raise taxes on working-class people, you're dead in the water politically. And therefore, she's come up with a way of funding it that doesn't raise taxes on working class people. And to do that, she had to jump through some weird hoops, you know, saying to employers, if you have full-time employees, then you have to pay a per head tax for those employees and all this kind of stuff. But hers is fairly complex. I mean, in some ways, it's fairly straightforward. But the bottom line is that she says, we're not going to raise taxes on working class people. Your taxes only go up if you're making over about $200,000 a year, and it's going to be funded through things like, you know, an employer mandate essentially. One of the criticisms of Warren's plan is that, you know, employers will figure out a way to game the system, and I have no doubt that that's true, and I have no doubt that both of these plans are going to be subject to a lot of change and a lot of debate and discussion and analysis if either of these two people was elected president and they were able to get these plans before Congress. Just like President Obama started out being in favor of single-payer health care. That was his campaign position when he first started running for president, when he was, you know, Senator Obama from Illinois, and then ended up with the Affordable Care Act, which is not Medicare for all. And even with the Affordable Care Act, he argued strongly that there should be a public option, the Buttigieg position, but wasn't able to pull it off because there were enough Democrats in Congress who were taking money from the health insurance companies that they wouldn't go along with the public option. So, you know, the question is, I guess the big question is, if you're a supporter of Medicare for all, do you think that the average American is willing to say, yeah, I'd be glad to pay more taxes in order to have Medicare for all? Or does it have to be funded in a way that the average American doesn't perceive any tax increase? In other words, which of these is more likely to be a successful sales pitch to the American people? Yes, your taxes are going to go up, but your overall expenses are going to go down, so you'll be ahead of the game. That's Bernie's position. Or Elizabeth Warren's, we can pull this off without your taxes going up at all. Stick around. We'll be right back with your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Fund Medicare for all, or is Medicare for all itself a losing proposition, as apparently Joe Scarborough is pitching this morning? Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just to catch up on some of the news of the day, by the way, and then I'm going to pick up your phone calls in just a moment. But Trump is now, the headline in the New York Times, Trump's Twitter war room aims its punches at decorated colonel. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, who testified he was on the Ukraine call and testified that he was concerned about this. This guy is a decorated war hero. And, was injured by an IED in either Iraq or Afghanistan. He's committed his life to service to his country. And, of course, that's intolerable to Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is attacking him. When you think about it, it's just extraordinary. And meanwhile, one of the national security aides for Mike Pence, who has some firsthand knowledge of what happened, is testifying as we speak before Congress. So there's that. Bill Barr, it turns out, according to reporting by Matt Zapowski and Josh Dawsey and Carol Linig over at the Washington Post, Trump went to Bill Barr and said, will you hold a press conference saying that I didn't do anything wrong on that phone call? I didn't break the law? And Barr said, no, not going to happen. Now, if that's true, and, we'll see, Trump just came out and said that it was, quote, low-life reporters. Low-life reporters was the phrase that he used, who are reporting that Bill Barr said no. But some of these low-life reporters are saying, no, our reporting is solid. We're good. It's that low-life president who's trying to pull this stuff off. So this is interesting. And then, of course, the Roger Stone trial started yesterday, and the assistant U.S. attorney, interestingly, his name is Zelensky, sounds like the president of Ukraine. It's not the president of Ukraine. It's the assistant U.S. attorney, Aaron Zelensky. He said in his opening statement, and I quote, "Evidence will show Roger Stone lied to the House Intelligence Committee because the truth looked bad. The truth looked bad for the Trump campaign, and the truth looked bad for Donald Trump." And one of the emails that Roger Stone sent out was titled, "I have an idea to save Trump's ass. Call me, please." Another was, "Tell Mueller to go F himself." It just goes on like that. All of this strongly suggests that that Donald Trump himself, in his written answers to Robert Mueller, lied. That he did the same thing that Bill Clinton did when Bill Clinton said, no, I didn't have sex with that woman, that Donald Trump lied like that, only in this case to Robert Mueller, and thus, indirectly to the FBI and all these other agencies. And that's a pretty strong thing. Bill Clinton got impeached for that. So it's like, the list is growing. Anyhow, we've been talking about Medicare for all, and Elizabeth Warren's bet that you can't raise taxes on middle-class people or they won't vote for you, versus Bernie's bet that people are smart enough to figure out that, yes, my taxes might go up $1,000 a year, my medical expenses are going to go down $2,000 a year. I end up ahead. I don't care what you call it. Jeremy in Van Nuys, California. Hey, Jeremy, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good. Your thoughts?
So the thing that I'm thinking about with Medicare for all and with the public option, I think that what we learned from Obamacare, if we don't make it so that doctors need to take or are, in essence, forced to take Medicare for all or a public option, they might step away from it. And that could kill the whole thing off at the knees, Yeah,
that's the point. As long as there's a robust for-profit health insurance market, the next step that these health insurance companies will take is they'll start saying to doctors, we'll raise your payment rates, but you've got to refuse to take Medicare patients. And that will then kill off Medicare. And there will be there's doctors right now who refuse to take Medicare. And I don't think it's because they're being spiffed by the health insurance companies, but they could even get explicit about it. And that's an argument against the public option thing, against the thing that Pete Buttigieg is promoting. So very interesting.
And I think that if you don't safeguard against that, then it almost kills it instantly.
Yeah, I think you may be right, and that's my concern. Jeremy, thank you for the call. Pam in Chicago listening to us at WCPT. Hey, Pam.
Hi, Tom. Tom, I support Elizabeth Warren's plan. I could go with Bernie. And I really want to see detailed numbers, because I don't want to believe that Elizabeth Warren would just say she wouldn't tax the middle class. I just don't want to believe that that would be just an out-and-out untruth. So I really believe that she's done the numbers. But, Tom, she's brought up other points. She talked about the private insurance companies. I don't think they could coexist, because they're in it for the profit and the greed. If they make their money from saying no, Tom, then that answers the question right there. Also, what happens when you're diagnosed with cancer or some other ailment, and the insurance company wants to drop you? See, I'm listening to what she's saying. She said she's talked to people, Tom, all over. There is nobody who is so in love with their plan. They love their physicians, their, OBGYN, their pediatrician, right?
Right.
Or their specialist, or even their primary care physician. So I know that some of physicians buy into a Medicare for all or some type of universal plan. So I'm asking, address the insurance company saying no to you or dropping you. And lastly, Tom, the United Auto Workers, when striking, the companies, the corporations, stop paying for the medical insurance, the health coverage insurance.
Yep.
So how can unions be so gung-ho about private insurance when your employer can drop it if you decide to strike?
Right, and essentially use it as a weapon, which is what they did in this GM strike. You're absolutely right, Pam. Excellent points all, and Medicare for All would solve all of those issues.
And not only that, doesn't it cover vision and some of the other, mental health that private insurance companies won't even cut?
Yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan, Pam. Pam, thank you very much. Joe in Coudersport, Pennsylvania. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Hey, Tom, a couple things. I'm listening every day to the Republican representatives and congressmen talking about unmasking the whistleblower. Just recently, this, what was her name, Christine Blasey Ford, that had to go around with Kavanaugh.
Right.
To this day, she can't live in her residence.
That's right.
She's still getting death threats. She has to live in a secret location, and all these Republicans are saying that they if they unmask him, it may affect his employment or her, his or her employment. It could affect their life, really. And the other thing I wanted to comment on was your subject today. I'm for Bernie's plan. I retired from a company that's based in Germany. I spent a lot of time in Germany. The people over there love their health care.
Right.
Everything is covered. We can't break it up where some people have private and some people have government sponsored.
So the question, Joe, that I'm asking, let's agree that Medicare for All is a good thing for our country. So the question is, when you're trying to sell it to the American people as part of a political campaign running for president, do you sell it as, yes, everybody's taxes are going to go up somewhat, but you're going to save money in the long run? You're going to make that back by having a decreased cost of insurance, no more co-pays, no more, et cetera, and we'll cover your vision and dental and all that stuff. Do you do that, which is Bernie's sales pitch, or do you say, yeah, we can do this without raising taxes on working people, which is Elizabeth Warren's sales pitch?
Yeah, I seriously, I'd go with Bernie's.
Yeah.
And but another thing that the Democrats aren't doing, they come out and they say how many, the Republicans come out and say how many trillions of dollars this is going to cost over 10 years or whatever.
Right.
They got the facts on it. What they got to tell them is how much is it going to cost us more than that if we stay where things are today. Right,
and it'll be $10 to $20 trillion more over a decade if we just keep things as they are.
Have to emphasize this.
Yeah.
It's crazy, I'll tell you. But people need to be somehow maybe they need to get some people from Europe over here that do have single payer
Well, you know, Bernie took a bunch of reporters and a small congressional delegation to Denmark, as I recall.
Denmark, yeah.
Or maybe it was Finland, whatever. I'm pretty sure it was Denmark. And it got no coverage in the media here. And, you know, keep in mind, who is giving the most money right now to MSNBC, CNN, and other news agencies?
Absolutely.
It's the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, look at all these ads on TV. We're one of only 2 countries in the world that allows drug companies to advertise on television. And they are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into these television networks. So, of course, the television networks are going to, you know, take their side on this. Joe, thank you for the call. Les in Winnemucca, Nevada. Hey, Les, what's up?
Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I just thought that everybody ought to. I watched a billionaire on TV last night crying because he was afraid Elizabeth Warren was going to raise his taxes.
Seriously?
Okay. And I thought to myself, how much of this rich guy's money actually comes from the U.S. government? Because all these rich people, whether they're in aeronautics industry or pharmaceutical or whatever industry they're in, they make a large percentage of their money off of the government.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on Social Security. Every time I go to my favorite pub and buy a beer, that money came from the government to them.
Arguably, it came from you indirectly, but yeah. No, I get your point. And also, you know, a lot of these rich people are benefiting from government programs like copyright laws and trademark laws that give them monopolies on you know, the things that they produce and that have been extended now, you know, because of Mickey Mouse and Disney by and large, you know, for really, really long periods of time. So
I live in government subsidized housing that they're getting rich off of.
Well, yeah, and not only that, there's all kinds of, and Les, thanks for the call. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that wealthy people can invest. It turns out that, you know, a bunch of Trump's buddies are making money off low-income housing, and they're getting all these subsidies from the federal government. You look at, you know, $300 billion in subsidies just to the fossil fuel industry. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So do you think that either Bernie's plan or Elizabeth Warren's plan, which one has the greatest liability, the greatest danger in trying to sell it to the American people as we go into the election? Thom Hartmann here. Gary in Baden, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Good morning, Thom Hartmann. How's the weather out there?
It's cold.
Yeah, it's cool here. I'm actually calling you. I'm leaving Baden, Pennsylvania, to be frank with you, and not to be on a personal and I'm in Parkersburg, West Virginia, where it's kind of cold and rainy, but the sun's coming out tomorrow, I believe.
Great. So what did you call about?
So I wanted to call, and very quickly as I can. Sometimes I get a little long-winded and try to be quick about this. This is entrenched greed. I pray that we are not past the breaking point. If we're at the breaking point, we can fix it. But if we're past, that's something we don't know. It's like a cancer, right?
Mm-hmm.
If a person has cancer, it's how deep it's in the body, and you can't get it out. The same analogy. Would you agree?
No, I've been saying for years that we are now at the cancer stage of capitalism. Yeah.
Right, you have been. And the reason I called, I want to use a word here I've never used before. One day the elevator went to the top floor with me. I came up with, I think another way to describe America with money, and money can do good things too. So I want to be fair. Money can do good things. We need it. You need to work. You need to make a living. But it's this balance that we don't have. So the word I came up with, we've lost our composure with money in America. Period. I believe that. We've lost our composure. Is that a good word?
Yeah, it's I think you're right, Gary. It's our value system that got turned upside down, and it got turned upside down in 1981 by Ronald Reagan and his buddies, where after the Carter administration, where Jimmy Carter famously walked from Congress to the White House after his inauguration and had, average working people invited to all of the balls and things, and Reagan said, screw that, and I'm going to go in the limousine, and we're going to have, and if you want to attend one of our balls, you got to pay us $10,000 or whatever it was, and then TV got in the act, and you had Dynasty, and all these other shows that were celebrating great wealth. They all came about in the 1980s, and we recalibrated our thinking, and we started basically holding up, we call them captains of the universe, right? The banksters.
I think also I think happened.
What's up?
I think we became too starry-eyed, and it's continuing. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, the people who own the media and who own now our political system as a result of the Supreme Court in 76 and 78, now those people have turned the media in a direction to say, okay, we're the ones who should be the stars. We're the ones who should be celebrated. We're the glitterati. We're the wealthy people. And this kind of whole celebrity culture turned from movie stars to rich people.
Right, exactly. So in closing, I must say this. In the end, we got to stop blaming the politicians, and we got to get, as you say, you're the one that says it, got to become more active and involved, because if we want our country to rebound, it'll be up to us in the end, not the politicians, right or wrong.
Yeah, I'm with you. Gary, thank you very much for the call. It's good to hear from you. This is a pretty amazing issue, actually, if you think about it. I mean, prior to the 1980s, and if you're old enough to remember, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, ask somebody. Prior to the 1980s, the average people on TV were average middle-class people. After the 1980s, they were wealthy people. There's been a shift. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Catherine in Baltimore, Maryland. Hey, Catherine, what's on your mind today? Catherine?
Hello?
Hey, there you go. What's up?
Okay. Good morning, or good afternoon. Both Senator Warren and Senator Sanders' plans on Medicare for All are definitely the best two that are out there. But I like Elizabeth Warren's. I read it, and it's 5 pages long. And I like the fact that one of the things that the Republicans were pushing, and Buttigieg was pushing, was that it would be great for business because they wouldn't have to pay for plans for their employees anymore. Mm-hmm. And I just said, no. Bernie and Elizabeth have been, saying we're going to stop this income inequality. And all the corporations and rich people, getting away scot-free. So I like her plan, and it really seems to address that for me.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Catherine, thank you very much for that. I appreciate the feedback. Brian in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Brian. You're on the air.
Hi. I'm with Elizabeth Warren's plan. I wish I could say that I thought the country was savvy enough to understand the nuances Bernie is telling them. But I don't think enough people are savvy enough to understand that they'll be better off overall, and they'll just see that their taxes are going up. And then secondly, there's also a decent amount of people who are savvy enough, but they think, well, my taxes will go up, but I've been burned before on health care, getting a handle on it, and that won't go down. So they'll be skeptical.
I think one of the points that the Axios thing made this morning is that since Warren rolled out her plan, from some polls, her popularity has dropped by 7 points relative to Joe Biden. And the speculation is that, she's now the one who's under fire for, I'm going to raise your taxes. Kind of stuff. And I guess the secondary question is, are the American people smart enough to figure out that this single-payer system, which pretty much every other developed country in the world has or has some variation of, is going to save them money no matter what you call it? I'm not certain that the American people are smart enough or well-informed enough. Smart enough is probably the wrong, but well-informed enough, particularly given the state of our media.
Savvy enough, I guess.
Yeah, savvy. Yeah, that's a good one.
to to be polite, but I agree with you. People don't look at it that way. They think, how much do I have right now?
Right.
That's what people think.
Yeah.
You know.
There you go.
And the taxes so anyway. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Yep. Joe in Cupertino, California. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Hey, Tom. First, before I get going, I just wanted to say you're somebody I respect highly, and I would wish you a happy anniversary. I try my best. I only have 30 years, but congratulations.
Well, thank you, Joe.
Enjoy your day.
Thank you.
I'm confused. I'm a little upset because of the fact that she's offering a plan that's different than what Medicare for All was supposed to be. But let's just, first of all, explain that it's not really Medicare for All. It's Medicaid for All, because Medicare is such a limited 20%. And I think Bernie needs to come out and explain exactly that. But I'm not sure.
Except here's the problem with that, Joe, twofold. Number one, Medicaid is associated in most people's minds with poor people's insurance. And number two, when you ask, people who are over 65 if they like their Medicare, almost universally they say, I absolutely love it. And it's Medicare and the VA are the two most beloved healthcare systems in the United States. So switching from saying Medicare all to saying Medicaid for all is going to produce, I think, a ton of screams of, oh, it's a bait and switch.
Okay.
You want us to have the poor people's insurance. I get what you're saying, though, because Medicaid does cover everything, and Medicare's got that 20% hole in it. But they're just saying we're going to do Medicare and we're going to fill that hole. Anyhow, back to you, Joe.
My question is, right now on the House floor is H.R. 1384. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that's more of like an explanation of benefits that they're offering. And both Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are not so specific, are very specific in what they'd like to do. This bill is actually being considered, or should be considered, as the blueprint. And I'm not sure if Bernie's plan is exactly H.R. 1384, but I know Elizabeth's not, because you can't have the employer involved if you're going to get insurance is the problem. Insurance companies are the problem, but the employers pay them. So the employer cannot be involved in this transaction. It's an agreement between us as a society and the people.
Well, what Warren is simply saying is, and so is Sanders to some extent, is that an employer who has full-time employees has to pay a tax, a Medicaid tax, which, by the way, employers are paying already, I believe. I mean, as an employer, I match Social Security taxes. I'm not sure if I'm matching Medicare taxes, but I think I am. But in any case, as FICA, the whole patch, that whole bundle, that those employers will pay basically a head tax that will go into the fund for Medicare for All. The pushback against that is that this is another incentive to employers to say, okay, all of my full-time employees are suddenly going to go to 29 hours a week, and I'm going to hire a few extra part-timers, and nobody's going to get benefits. But that's already been done. I mean, that goes back to a law I think it was part of the Great Society. I might be wrong.
Right. I want to make sure I understand this correctly, though, that you're mixing employee paid benefits with society's responsibility to care for those people that can't take care of themselves.
Well, it's just a way of extracting money from corporations. I mean, during the Eisenhower administration, corporations paid 30% of the total cost of the federal government. That's how high corporate taxes were. Right now, they pay 6%. So
that's correct.
This is saying the employers are going to go back to paying 8 or 9 or 10%, something like that.
Exactly.
And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to say, as an employer, you have to pay these taxes based on your full-time employees. And, we'll see where it goes. Joe, thank you very much for the call. We're coming up on the top of the hour here. Professor Richard Wolff is going to be with us next. What's the best way to pay for Medicare? Is it a wealth tax? And do higher taxes equal higher wages? Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, the Mythology of the White Proletariat, the True Story of the White Nation by J. Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies.
There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. The book Settlers.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, the co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author most recently of Understanding Marxism. His website's democracyatwork.info and rdwolff with 2fs.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff. Dr. Wolff, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
So I'm curious your thoughts. You know, there's this argument going on right now about whether what's the best way to pay for Medicare for all and what kind it should be, but B, whether Senator Sanders bet that if you tell Americans, yes, I'm going to raise your taxes, but on the other hand, your total income is also going to go up because your expenses are going to go down, versus Elizabeth Warren saying, basically corporations and rich people are going to pay for this and you're not going to pay any extra, saying, no, I'm not going to raise working class taxes to pay for Medicare for all, number one. And number two, how does a wealth tax, which is part of Warren's plan, and I'm not sure if it's part of Bernie's plan or not explicitly, how does that work and how does that fit in? There's a lot there if you want to riff on it.
Okay. First of all, just a note of comparison. Other wealthy countries, I'm thinking here particularly of those in Europe, have solved this problem, and they've done so for decades. So the notion here in the United States that there's something excruciatingly difficult or unworkable or overly complex is really special pleading by the folks who don't want it. There's no basis for it in fact. The Europeans have been able to provide basically medical insurance and coverage for everybody, every citizen, from birth until death. That was a demand of the people there. It became unstoppable after World War II, and it has become the reality in these countries, literally, as I say, from Scandinavia in the north to Italy and Spain in the south and everywhere in between. If they can do it, the simple answer is, so can we.
Yeah, and it was the same thing in Canada, by the way. Saskatchewan did this first, and then the whole rest of the, yeah.
Exactly. And there are many other countries, even poor third world countries, have responded to their people's demand for proper health care by providing these kinds of insurances. I just wanted to use the Europeans because they're more like us in other ways, and the wealth is there. But even poor countries do this because, health is considered one of those basic qualities of life that a decent society takes care of, like educating its children and so on. So let's turn then to the issue here in the United States. We could do it in a number of ways. We could provide the same kind of Medicare for all or whatever other term you want to use for it in a number of ways. But before I go into them, I think there's a basic mistake. A lot of the numbers thrown around do only one side of the ledger, namely, they look at what the literal cost would be to put such a program in place. But as every other country's history shows, if you have proper medical care and insurance, the actual cost of the medical care has to be what it costs to put it in place, and from that you have to subtract all of the savings that would occur if you had a properly healthy population. I mean, we have been, here in the United States, our longevity has been shrinking for the last 3 years. We have very bad numbers when it comes to the number of days in the hospital and the number of babies that live through the first year and all the other usual metrics of health care. So we are paying way too much. And if you had a proper health care system and a proper insurance administered for the people as a whole, a vast amount of the money we now spend would not be necessary. Remember, the medical costs we have in this country include paying a literal army of people working for insurance companies whose job it is to deny us the coverage we thought we had, and then an army of clerks and secretaries and others working for doctors and hospitals whose job it is to argue with that first group in order to get the money, the payments made. I mean, the waste and irrationality of this system would be dramatically reduced if, as happens in other countries, a proper Medicare for all included a real commitment to preventive medical care and not just a curing of a person already sick. Imagine the savings. I just recently read an article that indicates we spend on the order of $200 billion a year on the obesity problem in this country. Medical care, because it turns out if you're obese, you have more medical expenses per year than if you are not. There's a huge industry pandering to people that are overweight with all kinds of real and largely phony cures that they can spend too much money on. It goes on and on. All right, having put that aside, how would you pay whatever the net cost is? Well, both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren do have wealth taxes. They emphasize them a little bit differently. But let's take Elizabeth Warren simply because I think it's better known, even though I think Bernie's is as good or better. Elizabeth Warren wants to tax, and let's be clear about this, the wealth of people over the first $50 million. So if your personal wealth would be $50 million or less, and that is 99.9% of the American people, the wealth tax would not apply to you. So it's a tax that goes only after those, particularly the billionaires, but those who have an excess of $50 million. It applies one rate to them and a slightly higher rate to people who have either $100 million or $1 billion. There's stages and there's debates over what exactly the stages would be. The amount of money that would be raised is enormous, and that's because even though the number of people who have this kind of wealth is very tiny, they have an enormous amount of wealth for each of them, and hence it's a very targetable amount of money. When you're in that stratosphere, here's a little footnote for those people who think that there is going to be some kind of problem for these wealthy people. If you were to tax them at the rates that Elizabeth Warren proposes, they are now the richest people in America, and after they paid that tax, they would still be the richest people in America, basically because the amounts of tax she's imposing on them, single digits for most of them, is not going to change their situation. Their wealth, handled by hedge funds, goes up more than single digits a year anyway. So what the tax does is basically cancel out part of their gains. If anything, they will continue to become even richer, which makes the whole thing kind of crazy when you think about it. Now, the last point. We already tax wealth in the United States. Here is a point that Elizabeth Warren does not make, but which I think would make her case stronger. It's a simple point. Here's how we tax wealth. The federal government does not do that. It taxes income, but it doesn't tax your wealth. The state governments don't tax wealth in this country. They mostly tax your expenditure, and some of them tax your income. But the local governments in America do tax wealth. If you live in a community, you get an assessment every year from your town, what the value of your home is, your automobile, your small business inventory if you have one, and then there is a property tax levied on that property. But please notice, this is called a tangible property tax because it is levied only on things you can see and touch, like land, homes, business inventories, automobiles. Here is something that neither the local, nor the state, nor the federal government taxes in the way of property, stocks and bonds. This is very important for people to understand. The wealth tax that has existed for many years in this country falls on homeowners who pass it on to the renters they have. It falls on people who have a home if it's the only wealth they have. Where a wealth tax doesn't fall now is on the wealth held in the form of stocks and bonds and things like that. And it's a simple thing for me to say, that's where wealthy people hold the bulk of their wealth. They can't spend that on homes and cars, and so they have it as investments in stocks and bonds. And therefore, what really is the issue here is, are we finally going to extend the wealth tax so it doesn't just hit middle-income people who have their home or lower-income people whose rents are higher because the landlord is recovering what he pays in property tax on his house? Are we finally going to stop discriminating and extend the wealth tax to stocks and bonds? If we did, that alone would raise enough money for the Medicare proposal. So the issue here has nothing to do with resources, and it has nothing to do with complexity. The issue here is that the people who have the wealth do not want to be taxed, even for something as fundamental to social welfare and well-being as the health of the population.
Okay, so maybe it should be marketed as we're going to extend the property tax beyond just houses to stocks and bonds for rich people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And just call it the property tax. And I think I've heard Elizabeth Warren make that analogy, but it's a great sales position, or a great way of explaining it. Professor Richard Wolff.
I hope she hears it.
I do too. Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, WOLFF, and rdwolf.com is his other website. Thank you, Professor Wolff.
Okie doke. Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. It's 17 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Gordon in Sherman Oaks, California. Hey, Gordon, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom. So I worked for 35 years in the movie business, and my union negotiated my health benefits with the employers. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering why, with Bernie's plan, why I would vote for Bernie and give up something that I actually worked for. It wasn't something they gave me. And I worked for that for 35 years, and it covers me until I die, and my wife. So I'm fine. I really like Bernie, but I'm not thinking that I want
Because
to give
Medicare
that
for
up.
All will cover you right now and for the rest of your life until the day you die also. And in fact, it won't be offered by a for-profit health insurance company that literally has an army of people combing through every single claim looking for things to deny. You will have better coverage. You'd have more comprehensive coverage. You're not losing health insurance coverage. You're actually gaining health insurance coverage. You're gaining a better and more comprehensive health insurance coverage. And your company can no longer use it as a club over you. And your company can't do like United Airlines did and like Eastern Airlines did and so many other companies did back in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, where, you know, they'll go through a bankruptcy or a reorganization or a sale or a merger, and suddenly they say all our contracts with all our employees are void. Those insurance policies that they negotiated for years and years, we're going to throw out the window. We're going to steal their pension money. I mean, this is an old trick, Gordon. And by moving all of this into the federal government, where it's administered like Social Security and Medicare are right now, you will be free to go to work anywhere you want or to stay where you are until your retirement. I don't get your objection.
Well, yes, and you know, and I have lived in a society where there is socialized medicine, and it's not 100%. They're not always quite as good as the medicine that I've received here over the years.
If you're talking about Australia,
I do agree.
I've used the healthcare system in Australia.
Actually, it was England, Tom.
Okay, England. All right. Yeah, well, nobody is proposing a British-style healthcare system here in the United States. That's socialized medicine in the United Kingdom. The doctors work for the government. The hospitals are owned by the government. What's being proposed here is a single-payer healthcare system, which is more like what Australia has, and more like, you know, what most of the Scandinavian countries have, which covers you from birth till death, and even before birth, you know, like very good prenatal care. And, you know, I mean, that's it. And this... I think this argument that, you know, oh, gee, I negotiated a great plan or my union negotiated a great plan, I want to keep it. It's like, okay, so, you know, through a lot of your own hard work and your union's hard work, you finally got something when you had nothing. You finally got some health insurance, but the company is going to be skimming 20% off the top and putting it in the pocket of their CEOs and their senior executives and their shareholders as dividends. And so you're going to get, you know, 80% of something, and that something, it comes with absolutely no guarantee. Your employer will say, yes, I negotiated this. Your union will say, yes, we negotiated this. But wait until next year when that short-term negotiation is over. No union can negotiate for the rest of your life. So, you know, it just, I don't get it. Gordon, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back. We're going to talk. We've got a science fact coming up here in just a moment. And then I want to get into this question of, is Donald Trump the luckiest guy on earth or a master manipulator? Stick around. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Welcome back. Our science fact for the day is a punch in the gut. Scientists have known for 20 or 30 years that certain kinds of birds have struggled as humans and bird-gobbling cats encroach on their habitats. A new study shows the staggering extent of that loss. Nearly 1 in 3 birds, 29%, have vanished in the last 50 years, the last half century in North America. Well, this is happening all around the world. We've lost, but here in North America, we've lost over 3 billion birds since the 1970s, just here in the United States. A shocking science fact for the day. I also wanted to raise this question about Trump, and the media's pretty much not talking about this the way that I am, but I think that this is an important thing to note. Either it's the act of a master manipulator, or Donald Trump has the best luck there is. Trump, when he came into office, he wanted the Fed to lower interest rates. Because as the Fed lowers interest rates, business activity picks up because businesses can more easily borrow money and expand operations and things like that. And thus, it produces a boost to the economy. So he wanted interest rates to go down. But the Fed was saying, you know, things are good where they are. So Trump declares his trade war with China, starts slapping emergency tariffs on things kind of willy-nilly. That suppresses or softens the U.S. economy. The Fed is saying, well, you know, if the economy softens, then we'll have to lower interest rates. So when Trump's trade war softens our economy, the Fed comes in, and 3 times this year, they've lowered interest rates. So now Trump has got the low interest rates that he wanted, and now he's going back to China, you know, 12 months in advance of the election, going back to China saying, hey, you know, let's end these tariffs. And in fact, China is announcing, you know, phased in, you know, et cetera. So he's getting what he wanted, right? Exactly. He has manipulated. He's used his so-called trade war with China to A, cause people in the industrial Midwest, you know, the former factory workers, to believe that he's fighting for them, that he's trying to bring jobs home. The fact of the matter is, if that was really his intention, if that was really his plan, he would have done it collaboratively with Congress and would have created tariffs that last for decades rather than for a year or two. So why would he do tariffs on an emergency basis that only last a year or two? I'm beginning to think that he did it exclusively to manipulate Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, and the Fed, or the Federal Reserve Bank. That this wasn't just dumb luck, that this was a rather, you know, kind of evil genius master manipulation. And maybe it wasn't even Trump's idea. I mean, you know, maybe it was somebody on his staff who came up with it. But Trump, you know, because he works in business, and because he works in a business that's probably more than any other business than banking in the United States is sensitive to interest rates, and that's real estate. Because he works in that business, he understands the impact that interest rates have on the business cycle, on business in general, on the economy overall. And he also knew that the Fed would not lower interest rates if the economy stayed strong. So he had to weaken the economy, which is what he's been doing for 2.5 years. And now, and as a consequence of that, the Fed keeps lowering interest rates. And now he's got his Fed stimulus going just fine. And now he's trying to work out this deal with China. And probably before China announced it this morning, Don Jr. and Eric bought another $1 billion worth of stock someplace or made another bet. So somebody has made over $5 billion on these bets using apparently inside information from the Trump administration. And I'm thinking it's probably people in the Trump crime family. But anyhow, now China comes out and says, oh, yeah, we're going to phase out over the next 6 months. We're going to phase out over the next period of time. We're going to have gradual phase out of these tariffs. Well, every one of those tariff phase outs is going to goose the economy even more than the interest rate cuts.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Thus, Trump seems to have managed to manipulate this whole thing in a way that's going to give him the economy he needs to get reelected. What do you think?
This is the Thom.
Our book today is The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America by Greg Grandin. And this is from Chapter 1, titled All That Space. The British colonies in North America were conceived in expansion. America was an aspiration, an errand, and an obligation born out of violent Christian schism and Europe's interminable religious and imperial conflicts. Depending on the intricacies of their particular interpretations of Revelation, the Protestants who settled New England might have understood flight across the Atlantic as a way of escaping European war, or they might have seen migration as a chance to open a new front and win those wars on a new soil. Here in the 1600s, in the eschatological nebula of the New World, was the first paradoxical image of America as simultaneously pristine and despoiled, empty and at the same time filled with primitives begging for deliverance, subordinated to Catholic Spain, which had conquered its part of the Americas a century earlier and stood as the great obstacle to Reformation England's rise as a world power. All yell and cry with one voice, Libertia, Libertia, Richard Hakluyt, a clergyman and court minister, wrote in the late 1500s, hoping to convince investors and his queen to establish an American colony. As Puritan society frayed under the harsh conditions of settler life, the frontier threatened and beckoned. The dark woods were filled with witches, and they were witchy, inviting hither. The forest was the place where the community could be redeemed and given new purpose, a chance to once again start anew, or it could be a place of more sorrows, wilderness sorrows, as two early Puritan patriarchs described the hardships that awaited those who ventured into uncharted territory, where whatever solidarity existed would be smashed into atoms as settlers scattered to escape the rule of the clergy. People are ready to run wild into the woods again and to be as heathenish as ever, warned Increase Mather. Expansions could be, often in the same sermon, held up as the cause of and the solution to the difficulties of establishing Christian communities. Either way, Native Americans had to get out of the way. They could die. They waste, they molder away, they disappear, said one Puritan chronicler of indigenous people who had succumbed to European pestilence years before the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, thus clearing the earth for the establishment of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. God made way for his people by removing the heathen and planting them in the ground, said another observer. They could be murdered. The holy terror unleashed by the Puritans was, according to the historian Bernard Bailyn, driven by fears of what could happen to civilized people in an unimaginable wilderness and fears of racial conflicts in which God's children were fated to struggle with pitiless agents of Satan, pagan antichrists swarming in the world around them. Survivors could be enslaved. The first patent granted in colonial America in 1626 was to a Virginia merchant and planter, William Claiborne, for inventing a device that would not just restrain Indians, but also make them work. Claiborne was given an Indian to experiment on for the trial of his invention. Colonial records do not say what this innovation might have been, only noting that it was not successful. Or they could be pushed further and further west. The prodigious and relentless population, complained New Orleans Spanish governor in 1794, progressively drives the Indian nations before them and upon us, seeking to possess for itself this vast continent which the Indians occupy between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Appalachian Mountains. More than a century and a half later, writing in the early 1950s, the Mexican author and diplomat Octavio Paz made much the same point. America was, he writes, if anything, geography, pure space, open to human action. Since it lacked historical substance, ancient social classes, established institutions, religions, and hereditary laws, reality presented no obstacles other than natural ones. Men struggled not against history, but against nature. And wherever there was an historical obstacle, indigenous societies say, it was simply erased from history, reduced to a mere natural fact and dispensed with accordingly. Evil is outside, part of the natural world, like Indians, rivers, mountains, and other obstacles that must be domesticated or destroyed. End of quote. The American Revolution is a permanent revolution, Paz went on, a nonstop expulsion of, quote, all elements foreign to the American essence, and a constant invention of itself. And anything that stands in the way of that invention, anything that is in any way irreducible or inassimilable to perpetual creation, be it Native American, Spanish America, or history itself, quote, is not American. Quote, in other places, the future is one of man's attributes because we are men. We have a future. In Saxon America, the process is inverted and the future determines the man. We are men because we are the future, and everything that has no future is not a man. End of quote. The United States, Paz said, offers no room for contradictions, ambiguity, or conflict. The nation flies forward swiftly, as if weightless across the land. Trying to stop North Americans moving west, Stephen Austin, the founder of Texas, said over a century earlier, was like trying to stop the Mississippi with a dam of straw. The drive west waxed and waned and burst forward with great passion during key moments. The book, The Edge of the Myth, by Greg Grandin. So I guess welcome back, by the way. I guess the bottom line question that we all need to be asking is, do we all, as a society, as a country, want to continue being literally the only developed country in the world that pays roughly 20 to 25% of all of our health care expenses to cover profits for shareholders and executives? The 20 to 25% is skimmed off the top for shareholders and executives. Do we also, with regard to health care specifically, want to, well, I guess that's specific also, want to continue to be the country that has the highest administrative costs? There's a hospital in Toronto that has roughly the same number of beds and the same number of floors as a hospital in New York. I forget the name of the hospital in Toronto, the one in New York. I think the example was the Albert Einstein Hospital. The one in New York has an entire floor with, well over 100 employees devoted to billing, because there's all these different health insurance companies with all these different rules, and you got to get blah-de-blah. The hospital in Toronto has 2 employees and 1 desk that do the billing. Far more efficient. What do we want to do? Dave in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Oh, Tom, thank you, sir. The Bernie or Elizabeth Warren's plan, Medicare for All, is going to be demonized by the corporate media and the 1% either way. So it's going to be an uphill battle, because around every corner is Pete. And that's what they're pumping now. Elizabeth is old news, and I don't remember that being old news, because they're still talking about Biden trying to win. But around every corner is Pete. And then what I like about Elizabeth's plan is that the Americans have been screwed over for so long, for so many decades, that to offer us a plan that doesn't really cut into our value. What we have minimum wage hasn't gone up since the 70s. It should be over $22 an hour. Think of all the raping of money from the American worker and society that they've taken from us, and they're saying we want 15. We really want 22. We really want our Medicare paid for by the rich. They have taken billions and trillions from us through corporate giveaways and just everything in general. And I think it's time for the American people to get what they deserve, and that's a fair shake. We're not asking for a handout or a hand up. We just want a fair handshake, and I think Elizabeth Warren offers us that.
There you go. Dave, thank you for the call. I think both Warren and Sanders offer that. Jacob in Baltimore, Maryland. Hey, Jacob, your thoughts?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that I think it was very brave for Elizabeth Warren to come out with a specific attempt to pay for Medicare for all. I'm not sure if overall it was the best move politically, because I think it ties her hands a little bit in terms of just committing to this one version. So I think that's a little bit just politically a little bit problematic. And then the other major problem is I feel like it's playing semantics to say that there is no tax increase. I mean, an employer head tax is going to be passed on to the employees.
Well, what she's saying is that basically employers who are already paying, if employers who are already paying for health insurance, like I am, we write a check every month to Blue Cross for health insurance for Sean and Nate, or whatever the company is. We've changed a couple times over the years, they'll simply be writing that same check, only they'll be writing it to Medicare now. That's what she said.
Right. That's called maintenance of effort, right? But what I'm saying is, to say that a head tax is not a tax on employees, it's an indirect tax. but we know that indirect taxes.
Well, corporations have been making this argument forever, Jacob, and it's well debunked.
I'm saying it's regressive.
No, it is well debunked. Corporations, if a corporation is paying a tax, they can cover that by raising the price of their goods or by screwing their employees. Those are the only two things that Republicans and conservatives ever mention. But the fact of the matter is that the majority of the time, when companies are facing higher tax events, what they do is they lower dividends or they stabilize compensation for their senior-most employees.
I mean that I haven't looked into that myself, so I'll take your word on it. But my more problem is with the head tax as opposed to a payroll tax is that this acts regressively. If you have 100 people at a company and you're paying them all minimum wage, they're going to have to pay the same amount per person for that health care as somebody whose average employee payments are $300,000 a year, and so ultimately a larger percentage. This is
we don't know specifically, Jacob, but yes, that's one of the critiques.
Just by the nature of how that works, you play a fat.
No, not necessarily. I mean, Medicare right now, if you're making a couple $100,000 a year and you're on Medicare, you're going to be paying $500-600 a month for Medicare. If you're making $30,000 a year and you're on Medicare, you're working after the age of 65 and you're on Medicare, you're going to be paying $150 a month for Medicare. Medicare right now scales the monthly charge that they charge you for that monthly health insurance to your income. And so I don't know why this would be any different with regard to employers. I get it that that's one of the critiques, and in fact, there's a piece over on Common Dreams right now criticizing Warren's plan, saying, well, it's just a head tax and therefore it's super regressive. A, I don't get that. I don't agree with that. And B, this is the opening salvo for a discussion, and which raises another question. I mean, I don't recall specifically how Barack Obama sold the Affordable Care Act, or my recollection is that when he was running for president, it wasn't the Affordable Care Act; it was single-payer health care. Although maybe he morphed into insurance for all. But I think basically what we ended up with the Affordable Care Act was the plan that Hillary Clinton was running on in the primary in 2008. And so Obama took Hillary's plan, and Obama had been running on single payer. So this is all subject to change pretty radically, I think. Brent in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, Brett, what's up, Brent?
Yeah, I just wanted to say the option between Bernie and Sanders to me is Bernie and Warren is pretty easy. The guy has been talking about it for 40 years versus somebody who wasn't even about it that long ago. Her her head tax her plan has too many outs. Like you can, as an employer, you can say, I have no employees, I just have contractors. And then I'll give you an example.
Well, employers do that right now, and that's where we just need to enforce the law, because the Affordable Care Act, and I believe laws prior to that require employers who have employees who work more than 30 hours a week to have a certain level of benefits, and which is a full-time employee. I mean, that's how we're defining a full-time employee, is more than 30 hours a week. So yeah, maybe that can happen. So the question isn't who's the noble candidate and who's not. The question is, will Americans, the question that I'm posing is, will Americans be more willing to vote for a candidate who says, I'm not going to raise your taxes and I'm going to give you health insurance, which is Warren, versus Sanders, who's saying, I am going to raise your taxes, but your overall expenses are going to go down, and but I'm going to call it what it is, a tax.
Yes, and I agree with you, because I hung out with Republicans not that long ago, and one of them was telling me he's tired of paying $1,000 a month for insurance for him, his wife, and his child. He's a small business owner. And I said, that doesn't include your out-of-pocket expenses. He said, no. So I said, you spend $15,000 a year easy on health insurance, and he said easy. And I said, if your taxes go up $5,000, you save $10. If your taxes go up $10,000, you save $5. And he looked at me and he's like, wow, I never really thought of it that way.
Yeah, exactly. And that's and that's the question. I mean, he never thought of it that way. And that's the bet that Elizabeth Warren is making, is that most Americans don't think about it that way, and our media is not going to tell them to think about it that way. Our media is going to be doing everything they can to protect all the advertising dollars that they're getting right now from health insurance companies selling privatized Medicare plans and from drug companies, who are both benefiting hugely from the fact that Medicare for All doesn't exist in this country. They will both be harmed by Medicare for All, at least in terms of their massive profitability. So, Brent, thanks for the call. Dr. Shelby in Tallahassee, Florida. Hey, Dr. Shelby, what's up?
Yes, good afternoon, and I thank you so very much, Tom, for this discussion timely. My husband, retired cardiology physician. I, academician pharmacist, and we paid for 27 employees' health insurance. Mm-hmm. And they then still had to contribute with the plan that we had, about $300 to $400. We had a PPO plan, which was a premium plan. So we are already paying, as you stated. We are already paying. Right. It would simply be given to the Medicare for All budget.
Right.
We also have a condition where African Americans, and I'm a black woman. My husband and I both black Americans. We have most of our insurance. They talk this game of, well, most people are getting 100+ million people are going to lose their private insurance. Well, there are a lot of people who don't have insurance through the workplace. Home health care workers who are contract workers, school board drivers, bus drivers who are part-time workers, nursing home people, all this contract gig economy, Uber drivers, they're not receiving any employer health care, and we have no vision, with the heart patients. We marvel at our elder care. Right now, I have a 90-year-old mother, just had some knee surgery. $86,000, Tom. It's outrageous.
Yeah.
And we have a Medicare Advantage program that is also every other hour calling on the phone with a marketing campaign, running an ad on the television, as you stated. It is a propaganda paid for actually by the government. Remember, George W. Bush put the Medicare Advantage that we subsidize primarily retired, middle, and upper income white Americans, sir.
Right.
And like I said before, many African Americans do not have the coverage.
Right.
So, Elizabeth Warren, I was at the Essence Festival with Elizabeth Warren and all of the candidates who came in. There were several, but particularly I want to speak about Elizabeth Warren because I'm a professor. So I love Bernie Sanders also. His contribution to the debate and to just the common values that you talk about, the common. I use that a lot, and I thank you for that. And of course, it's a value point that social scientists have come. There's an esteemed. What is the name of the esteemed gentleman you had that gave us that kind of common value context?
Well, it goes all the way back to the founding of the republic. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
But the comment I want to make about the African American women at the Essence Festival, over 500,000 people gather over 4 or 5 days. We just finished the roundtable a survey through Essence Magazine, the Johnson Publishing out of Chicago.
Essence, ESSENCE.
Yes, Essence. Yes. We just completed the African American Women's Survey for the issues pertaining to the 2020 healthcare and public education, and Social Security. Those are the three textuals that will bridge the gap for our lives, and we do need. I think we're being caught up on. It seems like the term Medicare for All. I hear this with our patient care that we had that people didn't like. Medicare for All. It's going to be something free, or I don't. A lot of people don't. There's this context in America. There's a value point that it's still the propaganda, but the Medicare Advantage is making money because we are subsidizing that payment to a private payer.
That's correct. And we're
not making that. No, we are not. Yeah. Now, Elizabeth, I called Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren because I have supported both of those people. I just had my daughter graduate Harvard, and Elizabeth Warren, she was there. she went back to medical school after she was an anthropology finance major. And so for
Dr.
me,
Shelby, I'm sorry, we just hit the break. We're out of time here. We'll be back in just a moment. It's 48 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. George in Santee, California. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I would be one of the people that would be in favor of taking the money out of the military spending to pay for health care education in this country. There's a big waste there going on.
Taking money out of the military budget, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fine idea. I'm absolutely totally in favor of that. George, thank you for the call. Your phone was breaking up a little bit there. Pat in Seattle. Hey, Pat, what's up? Pat, you are on the air. No Pat. Okay. Let's try Audrey in Los Angeles. Hey, Audrey, you're on the air.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am well. What's up? What's on your mind?
You know, I love both Senator Warren and Senator Sanders' plans, but I was a big fan of the West Wing, and there was a great line in the last season of the West Wing that went something along the lines of, I don't care whether you call it a premium or a tax, tell me which one's cheaper. And
Right.
that's what they're not doing a great job of doing. Here in California, I want to say it was the last legislative session, they had a single-payer bill.
Right.
And it was very clear, 2.6%. That's what people paid. That's what businesses paid. And there was going to be no copay, no deductible. It was going to be comprehensive like what Medicare for All is. And that would have saved me $8,000 a year just in premiums. That's before the thousands of out-of-pocket.
So what happened to that legislation, Audrey? I remember when it was being brought up for debate in the General Assembly, but I don't recall how it resolved.
It passed the state Senate. It was stalled in the state Assembly because the guy who could get it out of committee was in the pocket of the insurance company.
Yeah. Okay.
But the guy who authored the bill is now the state insurance commissioner.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. I mean, I think that, you look at what happened in Canada. Tommy Douglas was the premier of Saskatchewan. We call them states, they call them provinces, we call them governors, they call them premiers. So Tommy Douglas was the premier of Saskatchewan back in the day. This was the late 50s, early 60s, wherever it was, and said, let's do single payer here in our state or in our province. And they did. And it worked really well, and the provinces around Saskatchewan were like, hey, we can do that. And pretty soon, over the course of 3 or 4 years, it spread all the way across Canada. The federal government got in and said, we'll backstop you guys, but it's still administered individually by the states. And, which is what Bernie was recommending on this program right up until 5 years ago. I don't know where he stands on that right now. We haven't had that conversation in 5 years, but he was saying it should be done started at the states, and having California be the test case would be just spectacular. I mean, talk about something that could happen. Do you see? I mean, you live in Los Angeles. Do you see any chance that that's going to come up again?
Well, with Gavin Newsom as governor, I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
There was no knowing whether Brown would have signed it, but I'm hoping Gavin Newsom supports it.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Audrey, your volume levels are wildly changing. I think you're talking on a speakerphone, and it's just like that just doesn't work well. But thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 52 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important,
how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Barry in West Grove, Pennsylvania. Hey, Barry, what's up?
Well, how you doing? Thank you for taking my call, Tom.
Sure.
Yeah, I've been on the ACA for this year with a silver plan that cost me $0.
Yeah, that's a lot. A surprising number of people who sign up for Affordable Care Act plans through what's the website? Something.gov. Anyway, you could Google
Healthcare.gov.
Healthcare.gov. Thank you very much. I didn't want to say it. I thought that was what it was, but I didn't want to say it if I wasn't certain. A lot of people, something like 70% of them are getting plans for less than $50 a month.
Well, premiums have gone up in Pennsylvania. I don't know about other states, but I selected a new plan, which cost me $108 a month, but it still has lower copays, lower costs for generic drugs than the previous plan.
Right.
So even though I'm going to be paying a little each month, the net cost might only be about $50 more per month.
Right. Now, the one thing that anybody who is thinking about signing up for Obamacare or buying any kind of private health insurance right now needs to know is that Trump's proposal to allow insurance companies to sell junk plans, what used to be called emergency plans because they could not last more than 90 days. These are plans where they can refuse to pay for things that involve pre-existing conditions. They can drop you if you get sick, what they used to call rescission, a nice fancy word. Those plans are back. Trump actually did this, and there are people offering these plans in the same ACA marketplaces. But what Trump did is he said, okay, these 90-day emergency plans, which were just designed to tide people over if they lose their job or something, it's basically disaster insurance. These 90-day plans can be extended for up to 3 years. And so what you need to ask when you're buying this plan or when you're reading the fine print on the plan is whether it is time limited. If it's time limited, it's one of these disaster plans. They are less expensive, but odds are if you get seriously sick, you're going to be in big trouble financially.
Oh, no, I looked through all the fine print and everything.
Great. So you got a real plan. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Independence Blue Cross of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I mean, the big companies are offering these junk plans. I'm not sure if that particular company is, but they absolutely are. So you need to pay attention to that. But Barry, I'm assuming you got a good plan. I'm just trying to warn other people. Barry, thank you for the call. Heather in Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Heather, my hometown. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
I need your help, kind of. The holidays are coming, and I'm in a extended family full of Trumpsters, and they're all going to argue against socialized medicine for the simple fact that all of the 100 people that are employed to process billing are going to be out of work.
Right.
And I validate that argument because they are going to have to find other jobs. But I don't have anything.
First of all, Medicare is going to have to hire hundreds of or tens of thousands of people to process claims. I mean, so those people have a job skill that's transportable to Medicare, and they're going to have offices all over the country. They already do, number one. And number two, right now we're at unemployment levels that we haven't seen since the 1950s. It's not like there's a shortage.
They don't believe that. That's the problem.
Yeah.
They don't buy it.
Yeah, it's not like there's a shortage of jobs.
It's not true.
Yeah, I mean, when the car came along, the buggy whip manufacturers had to start laying people off. Sometimes there's a price you pay for progress. Heather, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, we're reading from Biased, Uncovering the Hidden Prejudice That Shapes What We See, Think, and Do by Jennifer L. Eberhardt, Ph.D. This is from the introduction. She starts out by talking about how she's giving a talk to a group of police officers and chiefs of police about bias, and they're all sitting in stone-faced, cold, kind of glaring at her. And she continues, eventually I stopped with the lessons and the data graphs and the images and the jokes and the movie clips, none of which were working. She was not getting no response from the audience. And she says, I decided to veer off my usual script and share a personal story. I explained that some years ago, my son Everett and I were on a plane. He was 5 years old, wide-eyed and trying to take it all in. He looked around and saw a black passenger. He said, hey, that guy looks like Daddy. I looked at the man, and truth be told, he did not look anything like Daddy, not in any way. I looked around for anyone else Everett might be referring to, but there was only one black man on the plane. I couldn't help but be struck by the irony. The race researcher having to explain to her own black child that not all black people look alike. But then I paused and thought about the fact that kids see the world differently from adults. Maybe Everett was seeing something that I missed. I decided to take another look. I checked the guy's height. No resemblance there. He was several inches shorter than my husband. I studied his face. There was nothing in his features that looked familiar. I looked at his skin color. No similarity there either. Then I took a look at his hair. This man had dreadlocks flowing down his back, and Everett's father is bald. I gathered my thoughts and turned to my son, prepared to lecture him in the way I might inform an unobservant student in my class. But before I could begin, he looked up at me and said, I hope that man doesn't rob the plane. Maybe I didn't get that right. What did you say? I asked him, wishing I had not heard what I had heard. And he said it again, as innocently and as sweetly as you can imagine from a bright-eyed boy trying to understand the world. I hope he doesn't rob the plane. I was on the brink of being upset. Why would you say that? I asked as gently as I could. You know, Daddy wouldn't rob a plane. Yes, he said, I know. Well, why did you say that? This time my voice dropped an octave and turned sharp. Everett looked up at me with a really sad face and said very solemnly, I don't know why I said that. I don't know why I was thinking that. Just telling that story reminded me of how much that moment hurt. I took a deep breath, and when I looked back out at the crowd in the auditorium, I saw that the expressions had softened. Their eyes had changed. They were no longer uniformed police officers, and I was no longer a university researcher. We were parents, unable to protect our children from a world that is often bewildering and frightening, a world that influences them so profoundly, so insidiously, and so unconsciously that they and we don't know why we think the way we do. With a heavy heart, I continued with my point. We are living with such severe racial stratification that even a 5-year-old can tell us what's supposed to happen next. Even with no malice, even with no hatred, the Black Crime Association made its way into the mind of my 5-year-old son, into all of our children, into all of us. I finished the training and invited the audience to come up to ask questions or share their stories. I'd been warned that no one would, but one officer did stay behind in the emptying auditorium. As he approached the stage, I stepped down to meet him. Your story about your son on the plane reminded me of an experience I had on the street. It's something I haven't thought about in a long time, the officer said. I was out one day working undercover, the officer said, and I saw a guy at a distance who didn't look right. This guy looked similar to me, you know, black, same build, same height. But this guy had a scruffy beard, unkempt hair, ripped clothes, and he looked like he was up to no good. The guy began approaching me, and as he was getting closer, I had a feeling that he had a gun on him. Something's off with this guy, I thought. This dude ain't right. So the guy is coming down a hill near the front of a nice office building, one of those big office towers with glass walls, and as the guy's approaching, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was armed and dangerous. As I got closer to the building, I lost him for a second, and I began to feel panicked. Suddenly, I see the guy again, but this time he's inside the office building. I could see the guy clearly through the glass wall. He's walking inside the building in the same direction and at the same pace I was walking. Something was wrong. When I quickened my pace, I could see him quicken his pace. And finally, I decided to stop abruptly, turn, and confront the guy. He stops too, and I look him face to face, the officer said to me. And when I looked in his eyes, a shock went through me. I realized that I was staring at myself. I was the person I feared. I was staring at my own reflection through the mirrored wall. That entire time, I was tailing myself. I was profiling myself. The stories kept coming. At every single session, someone came up and told me a story, stories that enriched my understanding not only of police-community relations, but also of our human predicament. This book is an examination of implicit bias, what it is, where it comes from, how it affects us, and how we can address it. Implicit bias is not a new way of calling someone a racist. In fact, you don't have to be a racist at all to be influenced by it. Implicit bias is a kind of distorting lens that's a product of both the architecture of our brain and the disparity in our society. We all have ideas about race, even the most open-minded among us. Those ideas have the power to bias our perception, our attention, our memory, and our actions, all despite our conscious awareness or deliberate intentions. Our ideas about race are shaped by the stereotypes to which we're exposed on a daily basis. And one of the strongest stereotypes in American society associates blacks with criminality. This, and she continues, the book is Biased by Jennifer L. Eberhard, and it's great.
Thank you.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. China and the U.S. have agreed in principle, writes Tom Hancock in the Financial Times today, to remove some tariffs imposed in the trade dispute between the two countries, Beijing has said. Commerce Ministry spokesperson Gao Feng told reporters in Beijing on Thursday that negotiators from both sides had agreed to, quote, remove some of the additional tariffs in phases. I'm telling you, Trump is using this to keep goosing the economy, to keep it going until November of 2020 so that he can win re-election. And then all bets are off. And the question is, can he pull it off? And, you know, I honestly don't know the answer to that, but, you know, we're going to find out. Meanwhile, the Trump trade war, again, this is one of those interesting things about this trade war. The Trump trade war, this might also be another reason why he's willing to back off these emergency tariffs, is that this from Laura Clausen over at Daily Kos, in around 1 in 3 counties in the United States, unemployment is higher than it was a year ago. People are worse off than they were a year ago, 1 in 3 counties, and that includes every single county in the state of Wisconsin, every single county in the state of New Hampshire, and the majority of counties in Michigan, Minnesota, and North Carolina. So by undoing his trade war, maybe he'll provide some employment to those folks. And he's already got his low interest rates, you know, so I talked about that before. By the way, I wanted to give a shout out. My colleague and friend Joe Madison, SiriusXM, he's on SiriusXM's Urban View channel every morning from 6 to 10 a.m. He's been 35 years broadcasting, and he is being honored. He's the 6th most important talk show host in the United States. I'm number 8. Joe is spectacular. He's the best in the business. And he's being inducted into the National Radio Hall of Fame tomorrow night at Gotham Hall in Manhattan. He'll be the 11th African-American broadcaster inducted into the Hall of Fame. It's a big deal. So good on you, Joe. Congratulations. A federal judge has ruled that the Trump administration must provide mental health services to the thousands of families, Gabe Ortiz writing over at Daily Kos, to the thousands of families that cruelly ripped apart under the inhumane zero-tolerance policy.
He ruled that the U.S. could be held accountable for the enduring psychological harm brought about by forcibly taking children from their parents at the border with no guarantee of when or how they would be reunited. This was Judge John Kronstadt in the U.S. District Court in Los Angeles. He referred to previous federal cases that found that governments can be held liable when, with deliberate indifference, they place people in dangerous situations. So, you know, we've got over 5,500 children who've been stolen from their families by Stephen Miller and Donald Trump and Mike Pence. Some of them have probably been sold, into adoption or slavery. God only knows. We know some of them have been adopted without their actual parents even knowing, much less, offering permission. This is a small beginning. It's just a very small beginning. But it's this policy is just insane. It's so inhumane. This is. One of the things that the Constitution says a president must do, and in fact, the president says so in his oath of office, and the oath of office that the president takes is written into the Constitution. I mean, it's actually right there in the Constitution, in Article 2 of the Constitution, where it talks about the oath of office that the president shall take. And it says that, this is Section 3 of the Constitution, he shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And, part of his oath of office is that he will, here it is. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And Trump's not doing that. He's not defending the Affordable Care Act. In fact, he's actively sabotaging it. And he's not, frankly, executing the job of President of the United States, doing the job of being President of the United States. Today, he's holding a press conference and he's giving an award to somebody. Right? And the press conference has to do with the evils of communism. So, of course, it's going to be about, radical leftists. It's like, oh, my God. But here's how incompetent these guys are, how just scramble-brained incompetent. Catch this. This story, Julian Borger wrote this story for The Guardian. After the White House cut off military aid to Ukraine, Donald Trump's top officials scrambled to get it restored. So here you have, Trump telling, let's see, I guess it was Mick Mulvaney, his chief of staff, Trump telling Mick Mulvaney, stop the aid to Ukraine. Mick Mulvaney basically stopping the process. Whereas the entire State Department and the entire Defense Department are trying to get this military aid to Ukraine. But Trump puts a halt to it, or him and Mulvaney put a halt to it. But all around them, you've got the apparatus of the White House going, what? We got to do something. And so they're trying to call together a meeting. This, by the way, is the testimony of Bill Taylor, our current U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. He has the title of acting because he hasn't been confirmed by the Senate. But our current ambassador to the Ukraine, Bill Taylor, testified before Congress yesterday, and it was last week, and said that the reason, we got the transcripts yesterday, and said that the reason that they were unable to have to get a meeting with Donald Trump to encourage him to restore aid to Ukraine. They kept trying to have this meeting. They kept trying to, hey, we got to get together. We got to do these things. And in fact, he testified on the 22nd of October, but the transcript just came out. He said it was unanimous opinion. This is Bill Taylor. It was unanimous opinion at every level of interagency discussion that the aid should be restored. And the Secretaries of State and the Secretary of Defense, as well as the CIA Director and the National Security Advisor, all worked together to try to arrange an urgent meeting with Trump to, quote, convince him to release the hold. But Trump wouldn't have that meeting with his leaders, with the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the CIA Director, the National Security Advisor. He refused to have the meeting with them. Why? Because no meeting could be arranged until September. Well, why was that? They asked Taylor. And he said, and I quote, I think this was also about the time of the Greenland question, about purchasing Greenland, which took up a lot of the energy in the National Security Council. Seriously. Trump is trying to buy Greenland, and therefore he doesn't have enough bandwidth to have a conversation about Ukraine. Or maybe that's just the excuse that they're using while they're holding military aid hostage to, this bribery and extortion scheme, the shakedown that Trump was running on the president of Ukraine. And finally, I just want to highlight for you, pay attention to this, keep an eye, watch this space. The Republican governor of Kentucky lost the election Tuesday night before last. But it's by such a close margin that the Republicans are trying to use a law that the last time it was used was in 1899, where contested or disputed elections in Kentucky for governor and presumably for other statewide offices, but for governor I know for sure. If they're contested or disputed, they get thrown to the legislature, to the House and Senate, the Kentucky House and Senate. And they decide who's going to be the governor. And the House and Senate in Kentucky right now are controlled by Republicans. So bottom line here, the Republicans in Kentucky are getting ready to steal the election. Just nakedly steal the election right in front of God and everybody. And, they're going to wait a few days, maybe a few weeks for things to die down a little bit. But Bevins has not conceded. And these guys have started the wheels going. I doubt they can last a few weeks. I'm guessing this will be a few days. But, as maybe on a Friday night, to try and keep the story out of the news. I don't know. But I'm predicting that that's what they're going to do. We'll see. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Dale in Nebraska. Hey, Dale, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Yeah, great show, and I want to commend you for trying to explain Medicare to these people. Just a quick personal story.
Mm-hmm.
Once I got on Medicare, thank God, I went in and had double knee replacement at the same time. And by the time all was done and everything with the charges, it was well over $110,000. And, of course, I had a Plan F Medicare supplement at the time, but I don't think I paid more than $30 all told, and that included my opioids to control the pain from the surgery.
Right.
And so when I hear these people demonizing Medicare and talking about it like government, I never, ever had to ask government for anything. They just paid the bills.
Right.
And Medicare Advantage is Medicare Disadvantage. The reason, another real quick story is I had a close friend years ago that when Medicare Advantage first came out, he was an accountant. And he sold insurance, and he thought the Medicare Advantage was such a terrific plan that he converted a lot of his existing clients off of Medicare onto the Medicare Advantage.
Right.
Well, apparently some of them must have had some major claims that did not get paid, and suits were brought against him by some of those individuals to the point that he filed for bankruptcy and actually died fairly young. And I think a lot of his death was due to the pressure brought on by the lawsuit, that it literally wiped him out. So there's your disadvantage plan. And also, Wilbur Ross is a crook.
Yeah.
Look into the Bank of Cyprus.
Well, Fortune magazine called him a grifter.
Yeah.
I mean, Fortune magazine, when Fortune magazine calls you a grifter, you're probably a grifter.
if you're a billionaire, I mean, Fortune magazine lives to serve the billionaire class, and they just explicitly said, yeah, Wilbur Ross, he's a grifter. Dale, thanks for that. I appreciate that, and your stories. It's very kind of you. Dave in Goodman, Wisconsin. Hey, Dave, what's up? What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to point out Michael Moore said it very well in the movie Where Should We Invade Next?
Right.
He talked about, made a whole list of things that, they pay slightly more tax than we do, but all those things we pay out of our own pocket,
right.
And health care included. But there are so many things that they don't call taxes here, but really they are taxes, so we're paying for them. Anyway, I have Medicare, and I'm perfectly happy with it. I've got a question for you. You're an employer. When you offer health care to your employees, that's part of their compensation, which is part of their wages, correct?
Well, we don't call it part of their wages, and I'm not even sure that my employees know exactly how much we pay for it. I would have no problem telling them. But I don't think of it that way. I think of that as my social obligation, essentially.
But a lot of employers offer that as an incentive, and I would think that without having to pay that now, there might be some cost involved, but couldn't they raise their wages slightly?
Yeah, you could. And if your health care costs go down, you would have more money available that you could use to give people pay raises, and that's another selling point for Medicare for All.
Well, there's your tax.
There you go. Dave, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Doug in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Doug, it looks to me like you're about to make a really big point about the benefits of single-payer Medicare for All.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Something that hasn't been mentioned yet, and maybe you could give me an idea of a percentage, but we could do away with workman's comp insurance. That wouldn't be necessary anymore, and I'm assuming that's a good chunk of my so-called wages or expenses as an employee. And also, my car insurance, I have to pay for liability for other people if I hurt them. That would lower my car insurance also, wouldn't it?
Yes, and as an employer, we also have to have workman's compensation insurance. So if somebody's injured on the job, and even in a place like this, an office environment, somebody could get injured lifting a heavy box or something like that. All of those additional expenses of being an employer or an employee go away. So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
And if there was gun violence, it would be covered also. I mean, these people that are getting shot in our schools or on our streets, they would be covered also.
Yes. Everybody, although we need to do something about the gun violence problem. But yes, spot on. Doug, thank you very much for the call. Well said. Dennis in Shorewood, Illinois. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Oh, hi. How you doing, Tom?
Good.
Yeah, I got a question. Bernie says that, okay, you'll save money because you'll pay more in taxes, but your insurance costs will go down. Well, how would that affect somebody like my wife and I, who are 72 and already on Medicare, and we pay for supplemental?
Right. What it would mean is that what Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are both proposing is that Medicare cover people from birth to death, and that it no longer have that 20% hole that was built into it back in the 60s when Medicare was created. That there was this Republican theory, and basically this is the price that the conservatives demanded of Lyndon Johnson to pass Medicare, was there has to be, quote, skin in the game. That was a big phrase back in the 60s.
Oh, I know that. I was a union president. Yeah. I hear that all the time.
Okay, so we recognize the phrase, and basically what it meant was that the bizarre theory is that if people have access to free health care, they're just gonna spend all day long sitting in the doctor's office, which is a stupid idea. I mean, who wants to do that? Nobody. Maybe a few hypochondriacs, but they're identifiable as hypochondriacs, and that's a mental illness in and of itself. This is deserving of treatment, but the whole skin in the game thing really was an excuse to have the insurance companies still have some profit off elder care, off caring for people over 65. And so
if we got Medicare for all, that 20%, that additional policy that you bought would no longer be necessary. And your Medicare coverage would begin to cover your teeth and your eyes and your ears and mental health, none of which it covers right now. I'm not sure. It may cover mental health. I'm not certain about that. But Medicare itself for people on Medicare would get a whole lot better, and then Medicare would be available to everybody else. And we can do that because we're lowering the costs of, you know, the vast majority of people who have health insurance, which is not people over 65. And so those lowered costs will allow some improvement in the plans that are going to people who are over 65. So that's how it works, Dennis. Dennis, thanks a lot for the call. Scott in Sumter, South Carolina. Hey, Scott, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you, sir?
Good. What's on your mind?
Right. A gentleman 3 callers ahead of me kind of asked the same question I had. So if Company A is giving Blue Cross Blue...
A company has increased costs typically as the result of an increased tax or regulatory company that has a benefit as a consequence of changes in federal policy. Who is that benefit going to go to? Is it going to go to the employees? Well, it may. And I'd say with small companies, probably it's more likely that it'll go to employees. With large corporations, I think it's going to go to the shareholders. Go ahead, Scott.
Absolutely. Sorry to interrupt you. You know, to help pay into the system.
Well, I think the idea of Warren's plan, anyway, is that companies will be paying pretty much what they're paying right now. It's just that 20% of that money that they're paying is not going to go to the profits of the, sorry, Scott, is not going to go to the profits of the health insurance industry or the executives of a particular health insurance company, but rather, you know, is going to go to providing more care to more people in a more comprehensive way and adding dental and adding vision. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is the reason why your health insurance right now doesn't cover dental and vision and hearing, and it could, I mean, there are policies that do, but they're more expensive, is because that's the insurance company's profit margin. They're taking roughly 20%. And before the Affordable Care Act, the average was over 25%. And the Affordable Care Act capped it at 20% for big health insurance companies and 25% for small health insurance companies. That's the maximum that they can skim off the top and put in their own pockets. Well, when you get rid of the skim off the top and put in their own pockets money, you free up an enormous amount of money to cover these kind of secondary and tertiary expenses, or second and third tier expenses, from the way that our health insurance has been constructed up to this point. Things like vision and dental and stuff like that. And that's a good thing, I would think. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We're talking about health insurance, health care, you know, how does it work, whose plan is better, where are we going with this? And of course, is Trump an evil genius? Our book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is A Woman of No Importance, The Untold Story of the American Spy Who Helped Win World War II by Sonia Purnell. This is from the prologue. France was falling. Burned-out cars, once strapped high with treasured possessions, were nosed crazily into ditches. Their beloved cargoes of dolls, clocks, and mirrors lay smashed around them and along mile upon mile of unfriendly road. Their owners, young and old, sprawled across the hot dust and were groaning or already silent. Yet the hordes just kept streaming past them, a never-ending line of hunger and exhaustion, too fearful to stop for days on end. 10 million women, children, and old men were on the move, all fleeing Hitler's ranks, pouring across the border from the east and the north. Entire cities had uprooted themselves in a futile bid to escape the Nazi blitzkrieg that threatened to engulf them. The fevered talk was of German soldiers stripped to the waist in jubilation at the ease of their conquest. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of the dead. The babies had no milk, and the aged fell where they stood. The hordes drawing overladen old farm carts sagged and snarled in their sweat-drenched agony. The French heat wave of May 1940 was witness to this, the largest refugee exodus of all time.
Day after day, a solitary moving vehicle weaved its way through the crowd with a striking young woman at the wheel. Private Virginia Hall often ran low on fuel and medicines, but still pressed on in her French Army ambulance toward the advancing enemy. She persevered even when the German Stukas came screaming down to drop 110-pound bombs onto the convoys all around her, torching the cars and cratering the roads. Even when fighter planes swept over the treetops to machine gun the ditches where women and children were trying to take cover from the carnage. Even though French soldiers were deserting their units, abandoning their weapons and running away, some in their tanks. Even when her left hip was shot with pain from continually pressing down on the clutch with her prosthetic foot. Now, at the age of 34, her mission marked the turning point after years of cruel rejection. For her own sake, as much as for the casualties she was picking up from the battlefields and ferrying to the hospital, she could not fail again. There were many reasons why she was willingly jeopardizing her life far from home in aid of a foreign country when millions of others were giving up. Perhaps foremost among them was that it had been so long since she had felt so thrillingly alive. Disgusted with the cowardice of the deserters, she could not understand why they would not continue the fight. But then she had little to lose. The French still remembered sacrificing a third of their young menfolk to the Great War, and a nation of widows and orphans were in no mood for more bloodshed. Virginia, though, intended to go on the road, wherever the battle took her. She was prepared to take whatever risks, face down any dangers. Total war against the Third Reich might perversely offer her one last hope of personal peace. Yet even this was as nothing compared with what was to come in a life that drew out into a Homeric tale of adventure, action, and seemingly unfathomable courage. Virginia Hall's service in the France of summer 1940 was merely an apprenticeship for a near-suicide mission against the tyranny of the Nazis and their puppeteers in France. She helped to pioneer a daredevil role in espionage, sabotage, and subversion behind enemy lines in an era when women barely featured in the prism of heroism, when their part in combat was confined to the supportive and the palliative, when they were just expected to look nice and act obedient and let the men do the heavy lifting, when disabled women or men were confined to staying at home and leading often narrow, unsatisfying lives. The fact that a young woman who had lost her leg in tragic circumstances broke through the tightest constrictions and overcame prejudice and even hostility to help the Allies win the Second World War is astonishing. That a female guerrilla leader of her stature remains so little known to this day is incredible. Yet that is perhaps how Virginia would have wanted it. She operated in the shadows, and that was where she was happiest, even to her closest allies in France. She seemed to have no home or family or regiment, merely a burning desire to defeat the Nazis. They knew neither her real name nor her nationality, nor how she had arrived in their midst. Constantly changing in looks and demeanor, surfacing without notice across whole swaths of France, only to disappear again as suddenly, she remained an enigma throughout the war, and in some ways after it, too. Even now, tracing her story has involved 3 solid years of detective work, taking me from the National Archives in London, the Resistance Files in Lyon, and the parachute drop zones in the Haute-Loire, to the judicial dossiers of Paris and even the white marble corridors of CIA headquarters at Langley. My search led me through 9 levels of security clearance into the heart of today's world of American espionage. I have discussed the pressures of operating in enemy territory with a former member of Britain's special services and ex-intelligence officers from both sides of the Atlantic. I've tracked down files that were missing and discovered that others remain mysteriously lost or unaccounted for. I have spent days drawing diagrams matching dozens of code names with scores of her missions, months hunting for remaining extracts of these strange disappeared papers, years digging out forgotten documents and memoirs. The book A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell.
Welcome back. It's 34 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, it's the good, the bad, and the very, very ugly. The good, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is saying she wants to see 1 million charging stations for electric cars across the country by 2030. Merkel said that mobility in the future should be, quote, climate-friendly, flexible, value for money, and comfortable, end quote. Germany currently has around 21,000 charging points. Good on you, Chancellor Merkel. The bad, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, for rolling back safeguards that keep one of our largest industrial polluters, coal-burning power plants, from discharging poisons into America's waterways. But wait, there's more. The EPA also extended the deadlines for companies to stop using unlined toxic coal ash ponds, which are prone to spills and to leak into groundwater, thus contaminating them. These power plants are responsible for 30% of all toxic pollution dumped into America's surface waters, and that's very, very bad. And the very, very ugly Trump's EPA again for okaying the so-called emergency use of bee-killing pesticide. More than 40% of insects could go extinct on our planet just over the next few decades. So it makes no sense that the EPA would okay the bee-killing pesticide sulfoxaflor on 13.9 million acres of American farmland. The pesticide industry has been abusing a loophole in the EPA rules so they can continue to spray this poison on your food year after year, now 6 years in a row. Killing bees and at the same time poisoning our food, that's very, very ugly. We're learning, by the way, as Ambassador Taylor's testimony, the transcript of his testimony is coming out and people are reading through it, we're discovering that we were just a day or two away, maybe a week away at most, from the president of Ukraine giving in to Donald Trump's demand that he go on CNN and say that he was investigating Joe Biden's son, and thus, by inference, Joe Biden. That apparently President Zelensky was ready to do it, had reached out to CNN, and if the whistleblower hadn't come forth and said, here's what's going on, and if that hadn't grabbed the news cycle, then Zelensky was going to do it. I mean, he had no choice. Trump was extorting him. This was a criminal bribery and extortion plot being run by the President of the United States in order to game the 2020 election to help him get himself reelected. And Ukraine was right on the edge of going along with it, and the whistleblower saved the day, which might give you some, now understanding why Donald Trump Jr. yesterday tweeted out what he thought was the name of the whistleblower. Breitbart is going after the whistleblower by name, naming this guy, who he is, where he lives, what he does. CIA analyst, 33-year-old CIA analyst. We still don't know if this is the actual whistleblower or not. But Don Jr. and the rest of the Trump crime family, they're doing absolutely everything they can to say to anybody who works in the federal government, if you work for the Trump organization, you sign a non-disclosure agreement that says that if you say something, if you speak out of turn, we can sue you for millions of dollars. If you work in the federal government and you say something, we will out you. And right-wing trolls will chase you, haunt you, hunt you, and maybe even kill you. I mean, that's the bottom line. That is exactly what's going on. Dennis in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Hey, you were wondering if Trump was a genius or...
Dennis, your phone is sounding really, really funky. If you've got me on speaker, please take me off.
No, I don't have you on speaker.
Okay, all right. Then keep your thumb off the microphone. What's up? Just go ahead, try it again.
I don't have that either.
Okay.
Anyway, hey, you asked if Trump was a genius or a... yeah, I hear a reverb on your end,
or
too.
just lucky, yeah. Yeah.
Or if he's lucky, and I'm saying he's neither. What happens is about the only thing that Trump is good at is being tenacious. And I had just seen something where people who are very successful fail 15% of the time.
Right.
And I would say that what happens with Trump is that he fails regularly, but he also has surrounded himself with very good people, and that he continues to try to get what he wants, where other people might change their mind and not continue. he at least tries to continue. I'm just saying that that's probably his only good aspect.
I get it, Dennis, and I understand that, and I think that, there's that quote that's attributed to various presidents, most often Calvin Coolidge, that persistence is the name of the game. That tenacity is the thing that guarantees success, and I agree with you that Donald Trump is tenacious. He, if nothing else. I'm not sure that's an asset, but yeah. Thank you very much, Dennis. Tom in Frederick, Maryland. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I was calling about your health care debate. I spent 4 years in the UK. I was on the National Health Service. I really liked it. And ever since I got home, my bumper sticker is there's a conflict between capital and care.
Right.
And you see it every day. It underlines everything you've talked about today.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's something that Bernie or Warren, who I prefer, but whomever could hammer.
Yeah.
Take that home to people.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And thank you for sharing your experience living in the United Kingdom with us. Bill in Garner, Iowa. Hey, Bill, you wanted to talk about health care?
Hi. Yeah. Hi, Tom. How are you doing out there?
I'm well. Health insurance.
Yes. I wanted to call about how complicated, getting any kind of insurance is anymore. You don't know if you're going to get the right plan at all, and you're wondering if later on, like if you got the right one.
Right.
And also, like when you're working at a factory, and then they'll probably give you a small raise. Then here a month later, they'll take it away because rates went up on your health insurance. And you don't know if you're getting a very good plan there either. But I'm just concerned about all the complications with it. Just getting any kind of an insurance policy at all.
Right. Well, once you've got Medicare for all, pretty much everybody in the country will understand what the benefit package is because it'll be what everybody has.
Absolutely.
So it won't be confusing.
That's correct.
I mean, right now you've got to look through all these things, and you're always on the search for weasel words in the contracts, right? And I mean, this is happening right now on TV. They're saying, you can buy privatized Medicare Advantage plans that will cover dental and vision, and then you get into your dentist, and he's like, well, actually, it doesn't cover this. I mean, it might cover, cleaning your teeth or something, there's always these holes, these exceptions, these gotchas. And we just need to get rid of all that stuff. Well said. Thank you, Bill. Ruth in the San Bernardino Mountains in California. Hey, Ruth, what's up?
Hey, sorry, I had to get you off speakerphone. Hey, Tom, I'm very frustrated about the whole health care issue. To me, it seems like it's a no-brainer. I actually lived in London a couple of decades ago, and it worked very, very well, the healthcare system. Mm-hmm. I mean, what is the problem? Why are people, this fear-mongering, is it the fear that's stopping, people that could benefit from it from, embracing it or thinking it might be something actually good? I just can't understand why the hesitation.
Healthcare in the United States is a $1 trillion plus industry. It might even be over a $2 trillion industry. And with those kind of dollars involved, there are literally hundreds of billions of dollars, or probably at the bottom end, $100 billion, in profits at stake. So using some of that profit to buy space on the media, to fund think tanks that come out with papers, to fund trolls who will trash Medicare for All and Bernie or Elizabeth on Twitter and on Facebook and in other venues. All of those things are just, common sense business, I guess. If you put the profit of your company ahead of any sense of morality or obligation, ethical obligation to the rest of your society, I think that's just really the bottom line.
Don't you ever see through that?
No, unfortunately. And, when a politician comes out and says, oh, no, if Medicare for All is going to be a terrible thing, people believe it, and they may not realize that politician is taking money from the health insurance industry or from executives in the health insurance industry. And it's a real tragedy. Ruth, thank you for the call. Paul in Woodinville. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, really appreciate the previous callers who have lived, in England or in other countries where they have a single payer. But the question that everyone has to address, whether it's Senator Sanders or Senator Warren or Buttigieg, is this. Our current health care bill as a nation collectively is now over $4 trillion.
Thank you.
And I'm going to give you my references. We are at 19% of GDP, our healthcare costs, and as our GDP has crossed 20 trillion, 19% of 20 trillion is 3.8. This I got from Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel. He's the brother of Rahm Emanuel. In his book called Reinventing the American Healthcare System from 2014,
right.
He said that's what it is, and I had that confirmed by a hospital CEO in the Seattle area at Overlake Hospital, came to talk to our Kiwanis. I asked him that. He said, yep, it's 19% of GDP. And Zach Emanuel says that we are growing since 1970 at 2% of GDP on top of that. So as at 20 trillion GDP, add another $400 billion per year. For 2020, we are well over $4 trillion. And if you think about it, that is the size of our entire federal budget, $4 trillion plus. And not only 2% of GDP, but $400 billion is 10% of $4 trillion. So now our national health care bill is growing annually by 10%. At a minimum, you're seeing that in your premiums. My mom's Medigap, Blue Cross in Michigan, increased by 100%. It's doubled.
Wow.
This year. So I don't. What the candidates have to address, if you don't like Medicare for all, you better explain how you're going to control these costs, because it is going to outpace our not only our federal budget, it's going to get to the point where we can't fund anything else.
And that's where single payer is so efficient, because it is literally a single payer. So you can negotiate for drugs, you can negotiate for surgery, you can negotiate hospital stays. You're buying 100,000 hospital beds a week or whatever it may be. All of those things then become negotiable, and we all benefit from that. Paul, thank you. Thank you for the call, and thanks for the factoids. I needed that. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Bob in Westminster, Colorado. You're on the air.
How you doing, just want to make a comment.
Mm-hmm.
Medicare saved my life and made my life much more bearable. In 2014, I lost a foot to staph, and I also almost lost my right leg. I actually had a retired military surgeon do my surgery, and our co-pays are very low. My wife, a year later, had a hip replacement and has since developed a heart valve problem. The thing of it is, we have good coverage under Kaiser, and we've had great surgeons, and it's not like I was going to go around and try to find a surgeon to fix me when I was probably, from my doctors, what he told me was if I'd have waited another 24 hours to go in, I wouldn't have made it.
Wow. So Medicare saved your life because you had comprehensive health insurance.
And I'll tell you what, the cost of both of our cares would be probably close to close to $500,000.
Yeah, and that's this is what happens. Bob, thank you very much. Go ahead.
One quick question, though. One quick question, real quick. What's wrong with these people that are losing their food stamps and their health care down in these red states, and they're still voting for Trump? I'll see you later.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. What's wrong with them is that they're voting abortion, or they're voting religion, or they're voting don't like people of color, or they're voting don't like gay people. They're voting these so-called wedge issues, which are really fear or bigotry issues. That's basically what the Republican Party stands for these days, and that's who's on their side. Shank in North Carolina. Hey, Shank, what's on your mind? Shank?
Oh.
Hey, you're on the air.
Yeah, hello, I'm here.
You are on the air? Okay, I'm going to put Shank back on hold. He's on line one. Greg in Delano, California. Hey, Greg, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How you doing, buddy?
I'm well. Thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Well, I heard you mention it a while back about the how much doctors get paid, and that cost needs to be reduced. But how is that going to happen? How are you going to tell a doctor, well, you can't be a multimillionaire anymore?
Oh, I think, there are doctors in Canada who are making multiples of millions of dollars. There are some specialties, and it really has to do with, or should have to do with, how long you have to train to get a certain level of skill. A brain surgeon doesn't do brain surgery until they've fulfilled more years of residency and study than a general practitioner does, for example. And so, typically they're paid better. And that'll still be the case under Medicare for All.
Oh, I'm so ready for Medicare for All. You have no idea. I'm chomping at the bit to make it happen. But here's one more quick thing. All these jobs that are supposedly going to get lost in all this administration, all these secretaries that you mentioned earlier, all the billing people, and their argument is, well, I'm going to lose my job, and now what do I do? How do I go get another job in this field when this field is eliminated?
Well, some of them aren't. I mean, Medicare is obviously going to have to hire claims people. So there will be jobs for people with that skill set on the one hand. But on the other hand, if you're no longer working for a health insurance company telling people that you're going to deny their care and listening to them scream and cry and beg you to pay for their surgery or for their liver transplant or whatever, and you're having to deal with that, that's got to be a terrible, terrible job. I agree. I would not want that job. I would celebrate not having that job. Although, if it's like not having any job, I get that it's probably better to have a job, even an awful job, than no job. But let's do this right. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. So there's Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Hartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Richard on Vashon Island, Washington. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thanks for taking the call, Tom.
Sure.
Kind of following up on what Paul said in relation to Medicare about the trillions of dollars, $4 trillion. What a sales pitch I think that would be good for people would be to say that, hey, here's the total cost of our medical coverage in the United States per capita, divided by how many people there are.
Right, that's $4 trillion is, using Paul's numbers.
Right, divided by 300 million or 325 million or something. Right. And then compare that to what it would cost if it was Medicare for all. So that when they say, oh, your taxes are going to go up and this and that, someone can say, look, it's costing you $20,000 a year now per person. It could cost you $10,000 a year per person and get more coverage.
Right, and that's just comparing the United States to Canada, where we spend an average of a little over $10,000 per person, and Canada spends an average of a little over $5,000 a person.
Right, and just sidestep the issue of like, well, your taxes are going to go up. Listen, it's going to cost less for all of us. And then we all get coverage. It's less per person, and I think that's the way a good sales pitch to go at it.
Yeah, I agree.
Tom, thanks for all the work you do. I appreciate it, and enjoy this great dry November we're having. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, it is beautiful up here, although it's getting a little cold. Vince in Hampton, Virginia. Hey, Vince, what's up?
Yes, I was about branding again. We're so bad at branding. Like Hillary, when she ran, she had so many different slogans like "Stronger Together," "I'm with her," "Fighting for us," "Love Trump." Right? We need to brand the scandal in Ukraine the perfect call. I tell liberals this, and they bounce right by it and never mention it again. This is what makes Trump so powerful.
I think we need to brand it as bribery extortion scheme to flip the 2020 election, because that's what it was. I mean, let's not use something that's meta to the event. Dave? Vince, excuse me?
Yeah, it's too complex. You got to make it simple. Build that wall. The perfect call. It was the perfect call. The perfect call is what's going to bring the Orange King down and all his hatriots.
Well,
we got to start branding.
I get branding, and I understand what you're saying, Vince. And maybe you're right. Maybe that's the way to do it. Chuck in West Chicago, Illinois. Hey, Chuck, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I feel like calling it a tax out of the box is a big mistake. I think it needs to be branded as a contribution, or maybe like we talk about healthcare premiums. And we could say it can be paid at the same time as your taxes or in the same way your taxes are collected, but it's a contribution. It's not a tax.
Yeah. Yeah, perhaps using different language. I get it. And I think that's sort of what Elizabeth Warren has been trying to do. Chuck, thank you. John in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. It's a privilege to talk to you again.
Thank you. Back at
you. I have a question. Right now, I'm on Medicare, and I pay a premium to Medicare out of my Social Security check each month.
Correct.
If I'm not mistaken. And can you help me understand if the plans that Warren and Sanders are offering are actually going to be free, or are they going to be charging us premiums like we're paying now?
Well, the simple reality is, John, that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren can talk all day long and print thousands of plans and get consensus and argument and all kinds of stuff. But we really don't know what we're going to end up with until it begins moving through the sausage factory, through the legislature.
Well, here's the thing. What I believe is that if they explained the plan and said, well, you're going to pay a premium. For example, people making over $500,000 a year are going to pay $300 a month.
Right.
And people making over $100,000 a year are going to make $200.
This is what they do in most Canadian provinces. In at least one province, it's completely free. I know, we've had callers talk about it. In another province, it averages around $100, per month per family. It's that's the negotiable stuff. And I'm guessing that there would have to be something sort of like.
Go ahead.
Well, that may well be part of their plans, and I'm just not well informed enough to be able to answer your question, John. But I think that we're going to have to end up with something like that, where everybody is contributing something out of their own pocket, but not a great deal. A, and B, that it be means tested, so that people making under a certain amount of money are paying essentially nothing. John, thank you for your call. It's great to hear from you, and thank you all for being with us today. What a day. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Share with your friends how they can find progressive media. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat place.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.